nice small space, but we do have sound today just to make sure everybody can hear just fine. Thank you all for making it out to our strip till and cover crop field day today. Again, this morning is going to be our presentation leg of the program, and then after lunch we will be transitioning out to the demo field, which is about 10-12 minute drive from here. And we will have some folks leading a caravan. There will also be signs, much like hopefully you saw the signs coming in to get here. And I know Google Maps was not our friend trying to get here today, so hopefully, we may have some other folks straggling in if they had some issues with Google Maps and things like that. But you guys made it on time, and we appreciate that. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. I do want to point out our host sponsors for today. Of course, the Vermillion Park Soil Health Alliance, Clean Water Indiana, CCSI of Indiana, and NRCS. We appreciate everything that they put in to make today possible. And then also on the tables are our other program sponsors for today. So we appreciate everybody that's helped put this field day together. And we hope later today you walk away with a little bit more knowledge and maybe some more questions that need to be answered later on down the road. But I think we've got a good lineup of some professionals that can help answer those questions throughout the day. Restrooms are located in between here and the sanctuary, right next to the coon equipment table. So feel free to use those restrooms as needed. We will have some breaks in between the speakers, so you guys can get up, stretch your legs, get more coffee, refreshments. There's plenty up here. But we also have coon equipment in the back next to registration, and also there's a watershed group out there if you want to go talk to them about what they've got going on. And the coon folks will be out at the demo site. That's one of the pieces of equipment we'll be seeing run later this afternoon. I do want to quickly just introduce and thank our local soil health team. Don Donovan, our district conservationist, Carter Morgan, which probably many of you know, they're in the maroon shirt, Deb Barnett, who is the district administrator here in Park County, and then Daniel Welledge, who is the conservation resource technician for both Park and Vermillion County. So we all came together today to put together today. I'm Eric Schreiber, by the way, with Vermillion County. I guess I'll introduce myself as we go through this. So, other than that, I think that's all of the housekeeping things. And we've got a little bit of a change in the program. We're going to start off today with Clint Robinson. Clint lives over in actually Bethany, Illinois, right? But it's closer to Sullivan, a little bit bigger town. Clint is a strip till farmer. He uses strip till in his operation. And he had the opportunity to speak this year at the National No-Till Conference in Omaha, Nebraska. So he has graciously said yes to coming out and sharing his insights on strip till with all of you folks. So Clint, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I guess, I don't know if anybody of you were out in Omaha at a strip till conference and you've heard this, I apologize, you can get up and leave now. It is the exact same presentation, so gave it out there, started, I guess, in the beginning of August. They had requested that I give a talk on something that I started back in 2017, which is relay cropping. If you've been on Twitter, been at no-till conference, been at strip till conference, you've probably seen that. But in order to explain how we got to that point, went through strip till and cover crops and then into the relay. So that's kind of the process we'll follow this morning. A little background on myself. I started out after high school, went to the University of Illinois and got an engineering degree instead of agriculture, and that looking back is probably a mistake. Should have taken more ag classes. But regardless, that's the path I took. Graduated from there in '06. Worked in St. Louis for as technical sales for Carrier Air Conditioning Company. Was there for about 5 years, and then came back to the farm in 2011. So I've been back there for about 10 years now. And due to other reasons, my dad retired completely in 13. So that made it a little easier for me as a younger guy with new ideas to be able to try some new and different things than what maybe the older generation was used to. Just a little bit about our farm. About 1,800 acres. When Dad was running the farm, we had cattle for the most part ever since inception. Corn, soybeans, maybe 40, 50 acres of wheat, just for some straw. Since then, tried to incorporate more wheat. We've been growing barley for a few years now. This year we grew our own rye for a cover crop, and we're back into alfalfa for more livestock that we've got. I've added hair sheep and some feeder pigs. We've kind of got a zoo around there now. We've got a little bit of everything. Trying to incorporate livestock back into the rotation. I think it's probably about the same here. We get about 40 inches of rain, which if you go to cover cropping, you know that's important. In Omaha, we're talking to a very different crowd out there. South Dakota, North Dakota, all these guys are very jealous of our 40 inches of rain that we get. The things they can do it's a lot harder for them without moisture. So if you are into a lot of the things that are going to be discussed today, you've probably seen these soil health principles. They're associated mostly with the regenerative ag movement. We try to do these 5 things. We're trying to get to that point. We certainly don't do all of them on every acre all the time, and we don't do them all that well sometimes. This is just kind of a goal. But to have something in residue or a growing plant on the soil at all times, reduce our soil disturbance, whether that's mechanical with tillage, chemical with herbicides and fertilizers, traffic, whatever it may be, we're trying to leave the soil alone as much as we can. The most important one that we really tried to stress here in the last few years is the living root. And that gets into the small grains. We can have something covered, we can have something growing through the winter, late fall, winter, early spring. The living root, I think, is probably the most important thing in order to building a healthy soil. And then diversity of plant species and type, as we talk about different cover crop mixes and relay cropping, that is something that I think is a big deal to help you get a better soil quality, more infiltration, and all the different things you're looking for if you're going down this path. And then, of course, livestock. Again, we're trying to get into that. In Illinois, all the fences have been taken out, all the hedgerows are gone. There's very few, in our area, there's very few livestock confinements, so manure is hard to come by. I wish we had more looked into it. As a lot of you may know, Illinois is not exactly the political climate maybe you'd like to see for some of those types of things. But nonetheless, that's where we're headed, hopefully. This is, as we talk about cover crops and relay cropping, you've probably seen this before. These are certainly not an extensive list of cover crops, but a good chart as a guide. Cool season, warm season plants, grasses, broadleaves, and then legumes, kind of a subsection down below. So the relay that I've had experience with the most is wheat, which is a cool season grass, followed by soybeans, which is a warm season broadleaf, and then the next year in the rotation would be corn, which is a warm season grass. If you could wrap in a cool season broadleaf somewhere in there, you kind of complete the mix. Whenever we put a cover crop mix out, that's what we're aiming for, one out of each group. All of those different plants and different types will live different times of the year, different soil biology properties, just a lot of different things, root structure-wise, too, that are helpful. So for strip till for us, Dad and I started looking in 2007 at different strip till bars He didn't want anything to do with dry fertilizer. That was one more thing to do. So we got an old Blue Jet anhydrous bar with 12 knives on it, and then we tried to plant onto that with limited success. It was with markers. It just wasn't a great setup. So after looking through a lot of different strip till bars, we settled on the Kuhn Krause Gladiator, which is when I bought it was a 16-row machine. It's got a Montag dry box on it, 6 tons, and it had an anhydrous system that I added to it after we got it. So in the fall, we were running anhydrous, DAP, potash. In 13, that's kind of how we started, not knowing a whole lot about it. Just kind of started into that. And it worked out okay. 2012, obviously, I think through here was really dry, same for us. Since then, since we started strip till, it's been abnormally wet, I would say, 13 up through now in the fall and spring. So the anhydrous really kind of made it hard to get our strips made in the fall. So we have since gone away from that, and that makes it a lot easier. As soon as we get the beans off, or even now that we've got some wheat acres, we can get in there in August, September. When the soil is fit, that's your best time to make strips. If you don't start with a good strip in the fall, it's kind of like planting. You've already kind of missed the boat, in my opinion. More compaction, sidewall strength, all different kinds of things. The best thing you can do is make a good strip in the fall, I think. In 17, we moved to micro essentials just to start getting different things in the strip, try different micronutrients. A strip till bar is, if anybody has looked into those, is an expensive piece of equipment. So whenever we look at that piece of equipment, that purchase, I try to make it do as many different things as I can make it do. And so blending in different fertilizer mixes and that kind of thing, I think just adds to the value of the equipment. In 18, we moved to wide drops for our side dress pass. The root zone on corn is roughly 8 inches wide when you dig up the roots on the corn plant. We're already stripping in all of our nutrients in that strip. We've got starter fertilizer on the planter. It didn't make a lot of sense for us to broadcast or use some other form of nitrogen that's not in that strip. Good or bad, some people love them, some people hate them, I understand that. So far for us, since then, the last 3 years, it's been working pretty well. If you do go down the dry fertilizer path on strip till, and maybe some of you are already there, there's a product called ProCoat. It's a liquid zinc product that they mix in with dry fertilizer at your retailer. It does add a little bit of hassle to the mixing, but if you've got a good retailer that will be willing to do it, completely eliminates all the dust. Again, that strip till bar, it's a big investment. You're running dry fertilizer through it, really corrosive. That product will take all of your dust and either binds that dust particle to the fertilizer pellet or just creates a new particle when you blow it right out. An added benefit is you also get some zinc in the strip, which is what it was intended for. It's not really what we use it for, but just a side benefit for us. In 19, we added the strip fresheners. It seemed like with our wet springs, we weren't maybe getting the best emergence still. Since we've added that, we run liquid UAN through that. We've added some sulfur products in it. We've tried a few different things so far. I like that extra pass. It is a little more work in the spring, but it does seem to help our emergence so far. I think better. Something we've tried in 2020, and I think we will use going forward. Again, adding more different combinations of nutrients, even at small amounts. I think as you go down the soil health path, you're looking to find ways to reduce your fertilizer requirements and how much you put on, where you put it on. And I think if we can help release more of the nutrients in the soil, we'll be better off. The calcium and the sulfur and gypsum and the soil properties that gypsum kind of induces, it seems beneficial to us, and so far I think we're going to continue that based on our tissue samples and sap analysis that we've done so far. So now I want to talk a little bit about how we got into cover crops. Again, 2012 was a drought year. That was the first fall that we tried cover crops. If you can remember back then, that far, 2012 kind of led into 2013 with no real freeze. It was warm basically all year. I remember playing golf on my birthday on January 1st. The only time I've ever done that. And the annual rye that we drilled in that fall, we probably should have killed it that day instead of playing golf because it got really tall, really ranked. We planted it way too thick probably. On that year on corn, we saw we split fields wherever we put it. We saw 30 bushel loss on corn right to the line. So that was kind of a massive failure. So we kind of took a step back. Oats and radishes, if you haven't used cover crops, are really easy. They winter kill. You can fly them on. I guess it's a starting point for us. It doesn't do any of the other things that we're really looking for. It doesn't survive the winter. The root structure on oats is good, but if it dies off in November, you don't have anything in the spring to get you jump started there. So in 15, we switched back and we started flying on cereal rye and annual rye blended, and that seemed to be a little better. But the spring of 15 was really wet, and we had slug pressure that year. Just massive circles out in the middle of bean fields that we planted 3 times all the way into July. Some places I go and talk to guys where there's no-till conference or strip-till conference or just around the country. Some guys have never heard of that, and some guys have, and they're, yep, I know exactly what you're talking about. We've had the same thing. That year there were guys in our area that were going out at 3 o'clock in the morning with 32% trying to get enough salt on them to burn them off. It was kind of a pain. So that fall we used cereal rye, again, just straight cereal rye. We had it flown on. It's the picture. This is one of our fields here on the right side. We took our strip till bar. We were 15-inch beans prior to this. We took our strip till bar and made strips where the old corn rows were, thinking maybe that will generate enough tillage, enough soil disturbance to create a barrier that maybe the slugs won't. They enjoy the rye, but once you kill it off, they move into the beans. So we thought maybe that would work, and it really, since that year, whether it's been the weather differences or the strips or whatever, we have not seen slugs at all since then. For my soil, I don't necessarily like 30-inch beans. We've got some light timber soil around the lake. We're on the north end of Lake Shelbyville. Our good black dirt 30s are just as good as 15s, but for our light dirt 30s, sometimes are not quite as good. So in 17, on Twitter that summer, I found a guy here in Indiana. Again, if you have really been on Twitter or been to any of the conferences, you probably heard of Jason Monk. He is not really an invent relay cropping, but he was using, he's got hog barns, he's got a honey wagon, he mounted a cedar on the back of the honey wagon, and as he injected manure, he was dribbling wheat seed right behind it, and then planting beans into that. So that was on, I think, I'm not familiar with honey wagons, but I think it's 36, 40 inches, something on spacing. Then he planted beans into that in March, and got something crazy like 60 bushel wheat and 90 bushel beans. And so following along with that, the fall of 17, the picture there on the left, we'll talk more about it, but that we decided to plant wheat with our strip till barn on 30-inch centers. By doing that, that gave me kind of the idea that we could seed with our Montec ox. So we planted all of our covers on 30-inch rows, cereal rye, some clover blended in with them. Not any kind of mix you want. We've tried it, seems like. But if you mix it with a little bit of fertilizer, you can. It works best with a little dab of potash mixed in with it. But it flows really well, and we'll do a pretty even job of seeding. 2019, we didn't start planting corn that spring until June. The June planted corn didn't come off until November. And we just kind of took a break from cover crops because I didn't want to have the cost of the airplanes. We weren't necessarily satisfied with the coverage. Couldn't get in early enough to do what we wanted to do, so we didn't. 2020 was by far our worst bean yields. I'm not going to say it's because we didn't have cover crops, but wanted to get back into that. We grew our own barley that year, and so we had the barley phone on ahead of the soybeans last fall and planted the soybeans this year into a solid stand of barley. In this spring, this picture on the right side is one of our barley fields from 2020 that we frost seeded red clover into. We took 2 cuttings of hay off of it afterwards, after the barley was harvested, and then that's whenever we made our strips this spring. The clover was probably about 8 to 10 inches tall this spring, and then by planting time, I should have taken more pictures of this, but by planting time, the clover was about 2 feet tall, had completely closed over all the strips. Had nice strips underneath, but you couldn't see them all. We planted double pro corn, smart fat corn, and non-GMO corn into this. And today, we always haven't harvested yet. We're probably easily a month out on that, this particular field. But today, it all looks good. The verge was good, stand was good. This is something we're going to do more of. Maybe trying to get a more diverse cover crop mix than just straight clover. But this is where I think I want to be for corn planting, with a strip for now, and then a cover solid seed in between. This fall, we've raised the cereal rye, we've raised barley. We hope to have all of our corn planted into some sort of mix like this with clover and vetch and cereal rye. And all of our beans will be planted into next year, should be planted into our cereal rye. So everybody kind of does all these different things differently. Wanted to just kind of touch on the equipment that we use to give you an idea if you're not there yet and thinking about going down that road. So that's the same picture we had. That is a machine as a 16-year-old. Since then, we have the advantage of this toolbar is you can just unbolt the outside 2 rows on each side, make it 12-row. A little modification inside the box. But I had a 4-wheel drive tractor that was just maybe getting used 50 hours a year and sitting the rest of the time. And so we went to track tractors, 8-series Deere tractors that we can use for anything. And so I got rid of my 4-wheel drive tractor and made it a 12-row strip till bar. Are they going to have a coon bar here today? Does anybody know? I saw that they're responsible. Okay, so you can see this row unit better up there. There is some modifications they've done to it. Leading coulter, floating row cleaners, hand adjustable knife. Everything on that is hand adjustable. Every bearing on that row unit is the same, which I thought that was one of the selling points for me. You don't grease any of them, they're all sealed, and they're all the same. Whenever I bought it, we bought 10 bearings. I still have 10 bearings sitting on my shop bench. So far, we've had really good luck with all that. The only thing we've done is put new points on it and replaced all the chains on the rolling basket. This vertical tillage tool, I'm sure most of you are familiar with. This thing, my dad absolutely loves. This is how he planted corn and beans that fall, right in the spring. It's easy. Once I took over, this thing honestly sat in the weeds for probably 3 years. Until I put the Valmar box on it, I used this to seed our cover crops. We seeded all of our barley this year with it. It provides an absolute carpet of a grass cover. Our barley, I wasn't sure on the depth how even it would be, but it turns out that it didn't matter at all. The solid seeding that this provided last fall was just exceptional. So we're using this a little bit again. I'm not exactly a fan of it because you're just working that top inch, and with the big rains we get, we do see probably some erosion. So I don't use it unless we're putting a cover crop in. This is a strip freshener I talked about. It's an old 24-row 1770 John Deere frame with Yetter strip fresheners on it. Again, row cleaners, leading coulter. Those are just row cleaner blades turned around backwards. You see the nitrogen fertilizer hose and then a rolling basket for depth control. They have made these a lot better too. This is the cheap version of it. They've got one with all air cylinders on it that make this adjustable from the cab, which would be really nice. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the precision updates and everything on planters. The biggest thing, I guess, for us when we went to precision, we went from springs on a Kinsey planter down force to delta force. We kind of missed the airbags and getting that feedback. For me, this was a pretty eye-opening event because we were getting feedback in our strips, and especially now that we strip freshen, we are almost always getting an up force. So for years we were running spring down pressure and no-till soybeans. You definitely need that. But there wasn't a planter out there that had spring down pressure that you could lift the unit up, and we see almost constantly up pressure on those. This is a new addition that we had last fall. We got at the end of last summer. This is, if you remember the old Stein corn, twin 20s was going to be the new thing. Ultra narrow, high population, short stature. I don't know, I don't think the corn worked out. I think it maybe the hybrids probably didn't come along as fast as the equipment. This is one of the planters that Stein and Deere partnered with. It came out of North Dakota, I think, originally. But it's a twin 20 planter, so it's got 8-inch spacing and 12. We put seed right discs, which I think are made here in Indiana. And we planted all of our wheat last year with it. We planted all of our rye with it. And they make a disc even smaller than that you can plant clovers and different cover crop mixes with. The reason I wanted this planter is because we have done some work on 60-inch corn, 40s, twin 40s, twin 60s. This planter can honestly plant almost anything, any spacing that you want to try. So for us, being in that mindset of trying different things all the time and trying to find out a new path, it'll plant 20s, twin 20s, what I call almost 30s, it's 28 and 32. But it's a planter that you can, if you want to put a test plot in and try something, they are, if you can find them, there's not many out there. Great Plains makes a version too, but they're pretty cheap because the corn kind of fizzled out, I think, and nobody really has a use for them that way. But all in all, that's been a neat tool for us to do some experimenting with. This is a planter that we got whenever we started relay cropping. The transmission had gone bad on this planter, so it already had V-Drive Classic electric drive on it, which allowed me to be able to come in and take all of the wheels that contacted the ground either off or move them to right in front of the row. We put an offset hitch 15 inches on it so we could plant between the rows of wheat and not run over the wheat. Since then, we've also added the air downforce and the bulk fill box. So again, just a little precursor to how we got to relay cropping. This is a picture, it's not mine. It's one from a friend of mine out in Iowa. But that is barley planted in twin row configuration and then soybeans planted in between it. The point of relay cropping, at least for me, is you can you go back to your cover crop chart, you're looking at that, a lot of guys kill off their cover crop. This is a way to get a grass crop with a legume, to add carbon to the soil, add another crop to the cycle, and instead of double crop beans, which in our area may be 35 to 40 on a good year, you can increase your bean yields, maybe sacrifice a little on your wheat yields. And the good thing about this, I guess, is if you planted all of your soybean acres in this configuration, and we run into having enough hours in the summertime to get small grains harvested. You can just spray it out, it's a cover crop, just like you did before. But again, the different root structure, I've got a buddy that thinks that all beans and all legumes should be grown with a grass cover crop because of how hard the beans are on the soil. This is something that I think when you try this and when you see this, it's pretty obvious the difference between a relay field and a monocrop soybean field. So I just want to walk through some of the pictures that we did back in 17 on that. Again, talked about Jason doing the manure thing. We took the knives off of our strip till barn, blended that's about 2/3 maybe, 75 pounds of wheat. If we're planting monocrop wheat, we're going to be up in that 125 plus 1.6 million, 1.8 million seeds to the acre. This is down in that 900,000 or less, and since then we've even gone down less to about 500,000 on 30-inch rows. Mixed with DAP, I was kind of shooting in the dark on the DAP, but looked at what Jason's manure was getting, and so we just kind of picked that number and ran with it. So this picture up here on the right is the strip after we've planted the wheat. Probably from out there you can't see it. We use treated wheat because we're falling corn, but there are wheat seeds there we've dug up anywhere from 2 inches deep all the way up to just below the soil surface. Whenever we took the knife off, we zip tied the hose right in front of the fertilizer hose right in front of our rolling basket. So the burn builders and rolling basket just kind of made a perfect seed bed for wheat. This is what it looked like not quite a month later. The wheat's coming up. It's what we call bird shot pattern. It's not in a row. This really tillers out nice, as you'll see later. The important thing to me is without that knife in there and the row cleaners lifted up, we have almost solid corn stalks put across the whole field with the crop, the next wheat crop coming up through it. So this is, again, 3 weeks later, I guess, the wheat has really come on. We've got a little bit of warm weather. So one thing that this showed us, and it's probably common sense to most people, I completely overlooked it, I guess, when I went to strip till. In a dry configuration, it's not like anhydrous where you can just wrap up a bunch of hose and make every hose the same length. If you're running a dry box, there will be a V pattern. As if you don't turn on your dry box in time, there will be a V pattern, and on a 40-foot rig, it's about 20 feet from the end of it. We were trying to plant with it, so I thought all would be perfect, did not have overlap and all that. Well, then we saw these big V patterns where the center rows, we're about right, and then it's about 20, 25 feet out in the field. Again, not really an important thing, just one of those aha moments that we probably never would have saw much impact from until we started seeding with it. Fast forward through the winter, I had a neighbor that we tried some on that year as well. He had these, if you're big into wheat, you probably know what these are. I had no idea that he had these. They're Chafer stream bars. With his sprayer nozzle configuration, we could put one of these right over the row of wheat. We put our nitrogen 32% on, right over the wheat row, but nothing in between to add nitrogen to the bean crop. So after that shot of nitrogen, this is about a month later, we made our only herbicide pass until after the wheat's cut. We used 2,4-D prowl. At that time, it was easy to get and cheap, and really had pretty good weed control through that. These are, we're planning on using Extend beans, so we knew that at that time in 17, there wasn't the cutoff date on dicamba. Our plan was to come in with dicamba and clean anything up, weed escapes up to then. A lot of different ways you can do this, different herbicides. Some guys plant the wheat solid and then come in with like a hooded sprayer and just spray out where they're going to plant the beans. April 25th, we're planting beans, so that's probably, easily 2 months, 2.5 months ahead of when we would plant double crop beans. And that's the advantage. Everybody has come to realize that planting beans early makes all the difference on yield. 30-inch row beans, we're running this, back in 17, we're running about 140,000. Today, we're running, even on light, they're at 120. And we're looking to drop that as much as we can, but that's where we're at right now. Again, these are extend beans, 3/6 maturity, which is pretty standard. I assume it is for most of you guys in here too. A couple weeks later, the beans, are up. The wheat has really taken off. Plenty of moisture so far. You can start to see a few heads coming out of that. We're kind of preparing for our fungicide pass on it. So fast forward to the 18th of June. If we did in 17 what we do today, we would have cut all the wheat that day. The beans are ideal height. We can cut right over them. I don't have anything on, I run floaters on my combine and a 30-foot draper. So I ran it at an angle, thinking to push the beans over on the wheat stubble, help them stand back up. So this would have been ideal. The wheat was 19%. Our local elevator doesn't take anything over 15. So we quit. You can see how tall the wheat is compared to the beans. They're in the background. I wish we would have cut it all that day. We got a bunch of rain, and this is when we actually finished cutting the wheat. We're clipping a few of the leaves off the top. There's no doubt about that. So I don't know how bad that hurt it. You can argue all day on if you can, what you can do to a bean plant. Some would say that's going to make it branch out and put 2 on everywhere you cut it. I think we could have done better on our bean yield had we had something like most guys have and ran straight back and forth, pushed the beans down, and cut the wheat lower. Regardless, we had really good wheat. For first try, we were at 62 bushels on wheat, and the beans are already, up there getting ready to take over the wheat stubble. A couple weeks later, you can see they're already out taller than the wheat stubble is. This is when we made, so again, this is July 8th. Right now, I think Indiana's probably the same, but we're at June 15th, June 20th, cut off on that Canva. We don't really use it much anymore anyway. This, you can clean the field up in July with that Canva sequence. Really didn't have any wheat problems after that. But the beans at this point now are getting a lot of sunlight. The wheat's gone, and they're really going to spread out and fill in those rows. Fast forward August 27th. This is what that bean crop looked like. This is kind of down under the canopy. But if you look across that field, it's solid green. You can't tell there's ever any wheat there. On 30-inch rows, even they completely closed the gap. And pretty heavily potted compared to our normal monocrop beans. We're pretty happy with this. I wish I would have had more pictures of harvest, but that year, whenever we were cutting those, it was an evening with no wind, and it would have just been basically a picture of dust. So it was just one of those nights that we didn't get any good pictures or videos out of it. So again, just some of the, you go back to that slide about the soil health principles and all that, trying to hit as many of those as we can with the relay cropping and in our rotation, instead of just having a corn and bean oscillation back and forth, trying to mix in more wheat, but still in this economic climate be more profitable. Wheat's hard to make make us profitable. I don't think there's any doubt that it's good for the soil. I think it's just sometimes harder to make pencil out. And so this is a little bit, we went back and looked, and this is 17 numbers, obviously not exact, but in our area, 80 bushel wheat is pretty common. 40 bushel, probably a little strong on second crop beans, but they're out there, easy math. So you're looking at about $800 in gross revenue in that scenario. In the relay, we had 62 bushel wheat, 63 bushel beans, same prices. Just on those numbers alone, you're talking about $175 an acre in gross revenue. I think you can do better than that. Like I said, I think there's different ways we can go about getting higher bean yields, maybe sacrifice the wheat a little more. But then all you can just put in today's prices alone, and you can add another $125 to that equation. And that's just on the revenue side. We're using half half the wheat seed, which wheat seed isn't incredibly expensive, but half to a third of the wheat seed. We're going to bring our soybean seed down, and really the chemical that we had, 2,4-D, Prow, Sequence, and dicamba in that year, that's about as cheap a herbicide program for a clean field, I guess, as we've had. So, nothing's perfect. This system probably isn't either. If you're not used to having wheat, like we weren't, it's a lot of extra management when you need to be doing other things. You need to be spraying fungicide when you're planting beans and side dressing corn and those kind of things. So that was something that, just one more thing that we had to do. If you really try to push the wheat, which I don't recommend, and the wheat lodges on you, either too much nitrogen, Mother Nature comes in with a big rain. Now you've got to make the choice of whether you leave it and sacrifice the wheat, or try to go in and get the wheat and destroy your beans. If you try to get too low, you'll obviously just take out all your beans. The other thing for livestock guys, the only guys in our area really that grow wheat have livestock. So they all say, this doesn't work because we can't have straw. I haven't seen anybody come up with a way to get straw out of a relay scenario. I'm not saying that won't come someday, but for right now, I haven't seen that work. Wanted to go through, I showed you how we do it, what we came up with. We kind of fell over backwards into some of the things that we do. But again, this is one of Jason's prototypes on his planter. This is a cheap thing, that you can do for a couple $1,000s probably. I think those are 20-inch rows, and then he's got like a 40-inch band of wheat in between them. This is his combine. He's putting single narrow tires on the front, changing the tires in the back. The important thing about this is the flexi fingers, which I wasn't familiar with. I think they make crop lifters and stuff more in Canada and stuff like that. He bought a set of those and put on his platform. He runs straight with it. You'll see in the next picture how that worked. Those are the expensive way, I guess, to go about that. I think those are about $300 a piece. Obviously, he's only doing a 20-foot platform, so it doesn't take a lot of them. But they are fairly expensive. What it does is it pushes those beans over and allows him to get way down and get more sunlight to the lower leaves by cutting the wheat lower, which is, I think, is probably an advantage. Plus, he's not cutting any of the beans off at all, not damaging them at all. Guy saw him with flexi fingers, and he said, well, I don't want to spend the money on that. And he just took poly, bolted it to his platform, and you can say it's not probably quite as good. He's still getting some beans there, but if you want to try this on 15, 20 acres, that probably cost $100 total or less, and maybe you've got that sitting around. Probably the pinnacle of this system, one of the first guys to do this on a lot of acres really well, that is an old 53 series row crop head that Deere made. Was pretty popular back in the 80s. We don't use around here much anymore. With a little modification, we can make that thing cut wheat completely in the bean rows alone. This is the guy I was talking about. He's from Wisconsin. He runs a 30-foot, it's a 1253A, but it allows him. I think in Wisconsin, he was one of the first guys I saw do this. He was on the cover of No Till magazine back in 13 or 14 for doing this. I think in Wisconsin at that latitude, it's really hard to get second crop beans to be viable, and this allowed him to do it. I think he runs 300-400 acres this year, though, pretty successfully. This is committed to it. This is something you want to do. This is what you're going to do on a farm. He had special tracks made for his combine. I think that's probably his second, if I remember right, his second row crop head that he's modified and worked on. So again, a lot of different ways to accomplish this. When Jason first started doing this, he again uses manure tanks to sow the wheat, and he had a 20-inch planter. He planted crossways. It was what he had, and it worked. It was cheap. So again, a lot of different ways to skin this cat, but something that I think is probably a soil health win as much as an economic win. talked about wheat and soybeans, because that's what, that was easy for us. Those are two things that we grow. And we have a market for those in our area. There are a lot of different crops, I'm sure, that could work in this scenario. I couldn't find any pictures when I was putting this together. I wish I could. I know there was a guy in Mexico that was planting wheat with a drill, 15-foot drill, and he would plant pumpkins every 15 feet. He had a 15-foot platform, and he would do that. There's one of the guys, Lucas Criswell, is out in Pennsylvania. I guess has a market for sunflowers. He's trying some sunflowers, I think, this year. Again, I wish we had more markets in our area. We would try a lot more different things. But as of right now, that's kind of what we're limited to, somewhere we can find a market. So, I guess with that, that's pretty much all I've got for this morning. So we'd gladly entertain any questions or comments. Some of you probably been doing cover crops and strip till longer than me. So.
What kind of road cleaners, or what style wheel?
On what?
Or you have under cleaner?
We run sharp tooth
Okay.
together, row cleaners, and they've got the precision clean sweep.
Do you think a finger style would probably go on trouble and over your strips with the serial eye, or is it clean enough?
We haven't had any problems. You mean whenever we planted?
Well, I have a different style. I know what you're talking about. I have like a finger style. Certain that with the serial eye, if there's going to be no serial eye there, it might cause some wrapping or.
I can tell you it probably will. Just from talking to other guys, we also run Schaefer zipper closing units, and they're more of a spike.
Yeah.
They are swept back a little bit, but they will wrap. Our row cleaners, we've never had wrap since we started doing this. But I've heard of other guys just having absolute nightmares. All I can tell you, I guess, is that we haven't had any problem with our sharp tooths. But
Have you played green or are you terminated again?
yeah, this year we planted everything, all of our corn and beans that had cover crops on everything in green. We either sprayed it that day, or with corn, we've got a few more days that we allowed to grow. In fact, we did, this year we left some beans and we didn't spray them. Oh, I think the beans were about like that when we sprayed the barley off.
And what about your corn head? Do you have like a chopping corn head or?
I don't, we run, it's a 608 year corn head with knife rolls on it.
You get all the nice different.
We run our strip till bar, especially if we do corn on corn, right back through the same road. I'm trying to put my fertilizer and make a
Yeah,
band.
you mentioned that earlier, so you don't have any trouble with that either, through balls and.
I have, the only problem that we will have is like a morning like this morning, when it's foggy,
Yeah.
the dew is heavy, then we just wait till 10 o'clock and start. But on bean stubble, and coon grouse, if you talk to the guys out there, they make weights that go on the back of the strip till bar, or on the back of the row cleaners, to give you more head. I wish they had, like the Dawn machine. I think if I had to do over, I might go that route, just because they've got hydraulic downforce on there, and you can lift and lower your row cleaners on that. I haven't come up with a good way to put clean sweep. We kind of tried a little bit of everything. I haven't come up with a way to lift and lower my row cleaners on the strip till bar. I would like to do that, because there are times in bean stubble that there's not enough residue, and I would rather have a little bit dirtier strip. That sounds counterintuitive maybe, but especially with our strip freshener, I want a little more residue in that strip to provide some more airflow and different things. We've seen, I think, in my opinion, we've seen some too clean strips with our bar on bean stubble. It almost seals over, which is why we use the strip freshener.
So are you planting your cover crop before you strip, like during your southward clear plant?
Yep.
Do you have a lot of cover crop in the strip, or does the strip till bar throw most of the seed out?
So most of the time the seed has already germinated, and we're cleaning most of it back out. The strips are pretty clean. This year we did, and what I hope to go to is solid seeded covers and the twin 20 beans. And the reason I want to go that route is to go to a non-GMO bean. I think we can canopy faster and have better weed control that way. That's what we run into our light dirt, even with heavy covers. The 30-inch rows don't canopy fast enough to get some of those later emerging weeds, I think.
I know you mentioned that you were banning gypsum for tillage. Are you sure you all have automatic soils?
No,
You're,
not really. It's just the sulfur in the pelletized gypsum is 50-50 roughly, elemental versus SO4 or whatever. So it takes longer for it to break down. Obviously, sulfur is going to leach out over winter. We're putting it on in the fall. So we don't want to put a bunch of sulfur like an AMS product maybe in the fall, because we'll just lose the sulfur most likely. So that's one of the reasons is to get sulfur at the different time. But also, there's a lot of guys in the area that for a while were using gypsum, just regular gypsum, not pelletized, and the soil tilth and the soil health, the porosity that it generates is just a lot better. My thought is if I put that below the root zone and we can get it, get that root zone softened up, get more porosity down at 8 inches where we're putting it, the calcium and the sulfur together is going to do a couple different things for us.
we may have high calcium soils
Okay.
already.
So that may not be something you want to look at. I don't.
I'll get them excited. You ready?
So we have with us our next presenter, Mr. Gary Gainward. He is a strip till farmer from the Lafayette area, so not too awful far away. And he's going to share some of his insights through his multiple years of strip tilling.
I missed the trees with my auger. I just noticed that as I was watching. I think it is on, isn't it? It should be drinking. This will just get you woke up a little bit. I had the honors to speak this year, like this young man out at the National Convention. My talk, I've always said, life after stripping. When I got out there, they said, we can't say that. And I said, well, that's okay. That's what it is. The talk is going to cost you a little bit more because Ed Shue is here. I've known Ed, I think, 25 years. And a lot of my ideas I bounce off of Ed. We're far enough away that I can be honest with him and he can be honest with me, what works and what doesn't work. I highly recommend you find somebody in that category that you can kind of bounce some of these ideas off of, okay? To get started, this young lady over here, her and I started, and she said, don't count the years. A few years back, I was a ridge tiller. I started farming. My dad was a Xerox man, and I always wanted to farm. So when I was 16, I bought a combine and started doing peasant combine. When I was 18, I bought my first farm, and I started farming. Well, it wasn't too long after that the 80s hit. You remember the bloodbath of the 80s? And I stopped and realized I'm making everybody money but me. I'm making the seed guy money, fertilizer guy money, and the implement dealer guy money. And there wasn't anything left for me. What can I cut out? Well, you can't cut out seed. Cut out by quality. You can't cut out fertilizer. You got to be able to produce. But Bob Fields, my old John Deere guy, I looked at him one day and I said, you know, Bob, I love you, but not that much. So I looked for other ways to produce a crop that I could cut back my input costs. Now I got to warn you, I'm a conservation farmer. Conservation of the wallet. That comes first. If we don't conserve the wallet, we're not farming. Okay? So, you said something about planting wheat with beans. You'll realize that 40 years ago, Jim Mosley did the very same thing with ridge till. He planted wheat between the ridges, and then he went in the spring then and planted beans on top of the ridge, not really destroying the wheat, and then combine the wheat. King Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new unto this earth. It's just old men forget and young men say, hey, what did I discover? Isn't that true? Amen. So, strip tilling is nothing new. I remember back in the 70s in a small town of our neighborhoods, our Alice Chalmers dealer from that Federal company had a bush hog strip till unit, 6 rows. But there was one drawback. You didn't know where your strip was. So thus was created ridge till, because you knew where your strip was every year because you built a ridge, right? And it was called your tram line. And so you knew that's where you go. And so I went into corn bean strips. So I had 8 corn, 8 beans, 8 corn, 8 beans. One guy told me, a news guy from the local radio station, he says, how do you keep that separate in your hopper when you harvest? And I said, Skip, haven't you ever heard of succotash? And he says, so that's where that comes from. And I said, no, it's not. I had a 4-row crop bean head. When it's time to cut beans, you go cut beans. When it's time to shell corn. And it was like a light bulb coming on. And it was like, people were wondering, how are you doing this? So we tried that. And that was my best yields I had ever had. Is on the ridge, I leave that wheat came out, and you put a short hybrid on the outside, medium, and then a tall, and then your 4 rows coming back. It was tall back and short. And then your beans went like this. Why did they do that? Because the nitrogen from the corn, that outside row of beans got that nitrogen when we side dressed, and it got a boost, and it grew quite well. Why do we get away from it? I got more acres. Ridge till is an excellent way to do it when you have a minimal amount of acres, but something happened. I gained about 150 pounds. Now I'm a quite large farmer. See, there's other large farmers on the pretty good. 4 years ago, I bought my stripper, and I've been talking. I know there's a lot of different soil matters of what you have. And he's in some river bottom. You river bottom boys, I don't know what you're going to do with stalks. They float. And they always float to the other end of the field, and they get about that thick, and you're done. You can't burn them, you can't move them. So it's a problem. I don't farm river bottom up in Lafayette. I stay out of there. It's beautiful land. I'm not ever going there. Okay? So I'm running 1,700 acres. And I was looking for things. I went to recreational farming. I bought a deep ripper, John Deep Ripper, and my friend who ran it, he loved it. I had a field cultivator, and then I went to vertical tillage. And once again, I came to that conclusion. I'm making my seed guy money, my fertilizer guy money, and the input dealer guy money. And I said, enough. So now, in my system, I plant, I'm going to say a bad word, don't cringe. I cultivate, and I harvest, and then strip. I plant, cultivate, and strip all by myself. One man, 64 years old, runs 1,700 acres by himself. So if I can do it, you younger guys, you can do it too. Okay? So we've adapted the system what we can. I have a lot of guys that say, I want to buy a strip bar. And I'll say, okay, what have you done to prepare for it? Nothing. Well, don't buy one. How many guys own a strip tiller right now? Okay, the rest of you, don't buy one today, okay? You got to get prepared to do it, okay? The guys that own it will tell you the first thing you have to do, you have to have RTK. You have to memorize where you put the fertilizer. FS1, FS2 will not work. You've got to remember where it is. Because if you don't plant on the strips, I guarantee you're gonna have a 30 to 40 bushel decrease in your corn planting off the strip. I'll guarantee it. How do I know? I got off the strip. And you can see when you're cultivating, you're like, what happened there? I got off the strip. Okay? RTK. If you're not prepared to go there, don't go there. I am shocked at the guys up in my neck of the woods where it's flat, black, and beautiful, of the guys still running FS1 and FS2. I'm shocked. You know what happens when you go to lunch? The earth shifts. And now your bulk goes from 30 inches wide to 60, just because the earth shifted. Or it goes from 30 down to 10, just because the earth shifted. So you cannot rely on that when you're running strips. So RTK. Second thing what you gotta do is just what I did here. You gotta prepare your combine. What's your philosophy? What are you gonna do? Where are you gonna go? How are you gonna do it? I have a chopping head. Drago, you saw it earlier, with the blades. I also strip right on top of the rubber. I follow the combine. I leave an oven about yay tall, and when I have a hemigree in it, when it goes through, it rips the root ball right away and has a beautiful burn right there in the strip, okay? Also wanted to go with keeping everything, I'm an old bridger, same consistent line, I'm on everything 40 foot. I stumbled across a dealer that sold a honeybee. This is a honeybee draper head. Why a honeybee? Well, I don't have a big enough combine to lift a McDonald or a deer. When you put it on there, it's constantly seeking. The hydraulics aren't enough lead in the pants. A honeybee is air pillows instead of hydraulics. There's one drive unit instead of two. It's a lightweight head. The 40-foot weighs less than a 35-foot deer McDonald. So I went with a 40-foot honeybee. Love it. Simple. It's idiot proof. I'm the idiot proof. Very simple. The other thing, you got to get your tractors. You got to have a tractor that is able to go into the new computer systems. You need RTK. You need that update. I don't care what your unit is. You need to spend a little money on getting that up. I was able to kind of trade in some old equipment I didn't use anymore, and I ended up buying a John Deere 8370 RT. It's a 370 horse pulling a 16-row stripper. Now I've got some heavy clay, I've got some black, and I've got some sand. I pulled it at 6.2 miles an hour. Why not any faster? Well, I'll tell you the secret. You can, but you're going to clog. Because you're moving so much soil up with that shank, and you're catching it with these burning discs, that there's so much soil at an angle, those discs have to clean out. And if they don't clean out, you clog. 6.2 to 6.4 is just about as fast as you want to go to keep it flowing evenly through your field. Otherwise, you start having problems, okay? If you go to a soil warrior, I was talking to this young man, and I said, if you want to spend $500,000, has anyone ever seen a soil warrior? On YouTube, you've seen them on YouTube. You guys have got to watch it on YouTube. Yeah, you park it at the end of the field, and you tell the field, if you don't receive this now, I'm going to roll this thing over you, because it is big and intimidating. With that blade unit, speed is what you need in order to get that soil churning in that zone to work your fertilizer as deep as you can. The downside with the disc unit is you can only go 4 to 5 inches with the fertilizer instead of 7 like we do with the shank. Now, no one unit is for everybody. My friends down in Kentucky said we have nothing but blade units. I said, why? they have rocks. The shanks don't stand a chance, even the automatic trip or whatever. He said, we got rocks. And I said, that makes sense. So you go with a blade unit, okay? But they do the best of what they can with the soils that you have. So you have to look at your soil and say, you know, which one's gonna work best for me and what I'm trying to do or accomplish, okay? So you just can't run out and say, Coons Kraus or the new Omnibirth Raptor are the ones to go with. We've got some units out there that'll just blow your mind away. So you kind of got to pick that out a little bit too. So get your tractors ready. You got to see what your row spacing, or what you're going to go with a 12-row unit, not plan with a 24-row head. You know, I found out west that what we find going to these conventions, Indiana is nothing compared to what they're doing out west, because they will run 16-row units and then plant with a 36-row plant. How can they do it? RTK, okay? And, you know, tram lines, okay? But if you have a bunch of smaller fields and you want to stay in an 8-row system, my wife says, what would you do? And I said, if I was under 1,000 acres, I'd have an 8-row stripper, 8-row planter, 8-row corn head, and an 8-row row crop bean head. I like the row crop bean heads. I still row my beans after 46 years of farming. I insure some of my neighbors, and I know I out-yield them every year on my beans. But once again, I have less input costs because I band spray with the cultivator, okay? 15 inches of chemicals, that's all I have. Water, hemp, has no resistance to steel, okay? So it doesn't build up, that's another thing. Cover crop, it's interesting what he does. I kind of looked at this. Ed and I were talking one year, he put the cover crop out there with a specialized row unit, does a great job, but I wanted to come through and do like this young man and build the strips. So I put a Henniker air seeder on the back of my strip tiller, and I blow my cover crop only on the burn, right ahead of the basket. I put on 30 pounds to the acre, only on the burn. I don't have pictures, I got it on my phone if you want to see what it looks like. And it does a great job. But once again, I'm an old tight rod, 30 pounds, only on the burn. I've got all kinds of residue between the row. I farm hilly, windy ground. I have no soil room whatsoever, okay? So cover crop, I bought that unit, put it on the back of it. I really like it. If I go with another unit, I'm gonna set it up the exact same way. I'm gonna put a cover crop unit on the back of it and do it all at once, I can raise 1 acre of corn on 4 gallons of diesel fuel. It takes 2/10 of a gallon to plant it. It takes 3/10 of a gallon to cultivate it. I love my new tractor because it tells me what my consumption is per acre. It takes 7/10 of a gallon to strip it. And the rest of it is a combine end product. And I challenge you, in any other system, what do you think your fuel costs are? 10 gallons, you think? By the time you rip it, BT it a couple times, and plant it, so on and so forth. What do you think, 10? So, look what I'm saving. Fuel guy hated me because he said, Mr. Gangler, you're not buying your fair share of fuel. He said I had to sell my summer home up in the lake. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. The other fun thing of what I learned with strip till and going to these conventions is you can play with the fertility. Now, I told this young man that if the agronomist across the table there stands up and says, I don't think so, he's supposed to calm her down. several studies done last year with potash. There was a professor in Illinois that put on 200 pounds of potash in the strip under the row of corn. So what's happened? He said it boosted his corn yield by 26 bushel. I said, well, that's great. I'm there debating it with him, and I said, that's great, Central Illinois. You have a good dream one night, you still get 26 more bushel. He said, no, that was north, central, and south. Across the board. And I said, okay, I'm an old farmer, I'm not an agronomist. I said, why don't we just put on more potash with planter? Well, I didn't realize too much potash messes with the germination of your seed. Oh, that's why we don't. Yeah. But 7 inches under the row, it does well. Well, I was watching one of the Hefty Brothers videos on YouTube, and they like their potash level up to a 6 or a 7. Why? So I asked this young man, I said, what are we doing? He said, well, there's a K fixation factor. You have it there, but it's tied up. It's tied up. So if you put extra down there, it's more available for that plant to go up. They said that the Hefty boys, I don't know, they said, if you have some beans that are going down on you, your potash level might be low. You have more standability with higher level of potash. So we have a test going on up north to where we have put 200 pounds of phosphorus, 150 pounds of potash in a strip, and then my test strip is 200 phosphorus, 100 potash. And we've replicated that in the field. So you get to play around with some of the nutrients of what you're going to work with, and what works out best. So once you get into strip till, and once you get into memorizing where your lines are, you can start doing some experiments on your own farm. Because you just skip over 16 rows, you know where they're at, just like ridge till, okay? So it enables you to start doing some testing. Another test of what we have on is 200 phosphorus, 100 potash, and 50 pounds of Powell lime. Because I figured we're putting all this fertilizer in a zone, it's got to be screwing up with the pH balance. I don't know, I'm not a professor, but it's got to be, screwing things up because I go on the same row, same year after year after year, that I kind of want to balance it. Eileen, one of her colleagues is Ellsworth Christmas, who's a soybean specialist at Purdue. He goes to church with me. I love it. So one day I said, Ellsworth, I'm going to try this experiment. I'm putting 50 pounds of Pell lime in my strip. He came back the next week and he said, you'll triple your investment. I said, really? He said, oh yeah. Beans are going to hit that zone going, ooh, this is so good. So, we'll see. It cost me $2.50 to throw it into the tank per acre. Okay? And then we apply lime as needed on the rest of the field. Okay? I'm trying some, has anyone tried the biologicals in the starter fertilizer? The wonder drugs? I got a friend of mine out of Wolcott that uses, he makes a tea blend out of, I think, worm poop or something. He was trying to tell me what it does, and he soaks it in a tank. But the hot topic now is microbial action. Eileen taught us that years ago with earthworms. I'm sorry, she's still the earthworm specialist. If you ever want to know the life of an earthworm, you ask the #1 person in the United States right there, okay? Because it increases the microbial action that frees things up down in the soil. That's why we plant a cover crop, get more roots down there so we can transfer microbial action down into the soil, and we can really get it going, okay? So I've got some of that in my, we'll see. I've also played around with ESN. You guys ever use ESN? That starch encapsulated urea crystal. So in one strip, I have 200 phosphorus, 100 potash, and 50 pounds of ESN buried 7 inches under the root. Another strip, I have 200, 100, and 100 pounds of ESN. My whole thought is, I feed the plant right now 3 times. I put a third of my nitrogen on with the pre-emerge and my burn down. I put a third on with the planter, and then I put a third on 28 with the cultivator. So I thought, let's see what that does. So I called the ESN people, and he said, well, it's done all the time up north in the Dakotas of Minnesota because it gets colder, and they put it on in the fall, and it's an extra feeding. Nobody this far south has ever done it. We'll give you 10 acres worth if you share the results with us. I'm going to share the results, okay? And see what that does. Last year, Ellsworth, he says, sulfur, sulfur, sulfur. Sulfur is the hot topic. So the later you put it on, the better. So I ran a strip. He says, how'd it do, Gary? I said, Ellsworth, you don't want to know. He said, tell me. I said, the strip that I used Roundup only on out-yielded the strip that I cultivated and used sulfur in the mix. He said, oh well. But now you know. And you get to play around with it. And you'll know your soil, and you'll get to know your soil, what it's going to do. Not your neighbor's soil. We've got a big farmer up there, Fred Wise. If you ever go up to Carroll County, Fred Wise, he just bought, probably paid cash, I don't know, another 600 some odd acres for $7.4 million prototype for it. He runs these 3 massive combines and grain carts and semis, and I pull along the road and I stop and I watch him. I don't go to the farm hardware show, and I figured that's the closest I'm going to come to the farm hardware show. And it's okay, I'm glad he's got it, because I get to look at it. Okay? And I'm happy for it. I look only at my farm and what it does for me. Okay? So when you start thinking of what you're going to do with stripping, don't run out and buy a bar just to be buying it. I have one colleague up in Huntington that just picked up an 8-row unit with no fertilizer. Why? Well, I want to try stripping. That's like buying a brand new John Deere tractor and leaving it in your barn. Well, I wanted to buy a new one. Well, you got it. Let's play with it. Give it out. What are you going to do with it? Well, I'm going to see just stripping with not putting fertilizer down exactly what it's going to do. Okay? Wrong. Because I guarantee you, if it fails, he's going to tell me I'm full of it. Because you've got to think it through what you're going to do with it. Okay? Got to think it through. Strip till is for you younger men. You will address the problem. I will address the elephant in the room. Phosphorus. What's so bad about phosphorus? Do you young men know what's so bad about phosphorus?
Expense.
Expense? What else? It runs away? So, we buy more. That's the expense, right? That's every farmer I talk to. Wrong. Gulf of Mexico. That's what's wrong with it. What's happening in the Gulf of Mexico? What's growing in the Gulf of Mexico? Algae. Where's it coming from?
Mississippi.
You all. Phosphorus. Phosphorus. You will address and will be regulated on how you're going to spread fertilizer in the future. If you call me wrong, okay. How do you apply hog manure, liquid hog manure? Does anyone know?
Yeah.
Why?
Neighbors don't like the smell.
They don't like it whether you inject it or not. Phosphorus. Phosphorus. That's why you have to inject it. I was nervous as all get out. Did you get a chance to talk to Dave Hula?
I didn't talk to him.
Oh, gosh. Be thankful you did. Does anyone know who Dave Hula is? 616 corn per acre. He has the national record of producing 616 bushels of corn per acre. I told him, I said, I'm going to report you to the John Deere Combine Abuse line for abusing a combine and shelling 600 bushels of corn for the combine. Dave Hula lives by the James River, which connects into the Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay was being overridden by algae, killing all the fish, the shells, everything. So the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which look it up, it's huge, is now extremely highly regulated by the USDA on what they can and can't do. And I said, Dave, how tight is the regulation? And he said, well, Gary, excuse me ladies, but we have a bad habit, we farmers. When we gotta go to the bathroom, we gotta go to the bathroom, don't we? He says, if I have to take a leak down the field, I have to dig a hole 8 inches deep, pee directly into the hole, and cover it. And cover it. Or else I'm against regulations. Now we laugh. And I said, really? And he says, it's tight. Lake Erie, if you go into northwestern Ohio and talk to any farmer there, they will tell you that they are banned from any broadcast surface application of anything. So you plow it. So you broadcast your P&K and you go out and you chisel it, right? Wrong. They now have, because algae is growing in Lake Erie, Toledo cannot use Lake Erie for the drinking water. So how are they doing it? Regulating. Regulating. I live in the Wildcat Creek watershed, which dumps into the Wabash, and you all dump later on. They're watching our watershed. They're taking samples, and that's what they're checking for. One of my farms, I have to cross the Wabash River to get to. And last fall, I was coming back with the combine, and I looked off to the west, and I couldn't believe it. And I wish I didn't take a picture of it, but I was on a bridge with a white combine. You don't want to stop. Guess what color the river was? Green. Algae. Because the river, the water level was low. Have you ever seen it, Eileen? It's eerie. The light hits it just right, and it was the greenest thing I'd ever seen. I went home and I told my wife, I said, it's scary. They're watching. Talk to your conservationists. So you're going to have to deal with phosphorus, okay? How are you going to put it on? We have one gentleman out in Brookston that he has it looks like an anhydrous bar with a Montag tank on the back of it that he doesn't create a berm or anything, but he injects phosphorus and potash every 30 inches in his field. Now, his lines aren't straight, but they're kind of straight. He's really just injecting his phosphorus into the ground is what he's doing. I went a step further and I went on into creating a burning plant on top of it. You said an important factor. I'll switch gears. You guys are blazing over. It's time for another. Let's try to go ahead. Oh, here she is. This is my, all right, Bill Jones. Here's my Henniker. This is in springtime. I wasn't able to get everything done. This is corn stalks that I am stripping into and about to plant here a week later. You can see, this is fun to watch, what the whole theory is. I'm just cleaning off the seed bed where it is, 6.2 mile an hour. If you buy a Henniker, let me tell you, you have to modify it. I took off all of their disc units here. They have disc units. They made it out of stamped steel. They never scour. Anything wrong with that? Who would buy a plow that never scoured? Anyone in here? I called Henniker and I said, what idiot engineered this thing? Well, we put these fancy little scraper DVDs in here to scrape it off. Well, guess what those do? Nothing. So I went to Coons Kraus and I looked at theirs, and it's a waffled straight holder, and it's perfect angle, catches everything, throws it back into the vermin, and solves that problem. Cleans out, scours, polishes up, does quite well. So that's my stripper. When you buy a stripper, you gotta buy a GoPro. Because you'll want to film yourself. Just don't tell your wife you're practicing on her. Get you upset. Come on. Trying to make it go faster. All right, you know what I'm doing there. This is the stripper looking straight on. I'm attempting to, I get upset with John Deere. Well, I want to be right on the money. I want to be right down the road. RTK isn't that close, but that's bean stubble. I also found something interesting here. You see where my spring weeds are? You see anything wrong with that? They're only between the row. So that's my chemical guy. All of my berms or ridges are clean, but I only have weeds between the row. He said, I kind of like that. Well, that's the only spot my chemical is. And I said, we get carryover? He says, no, I'm getting good weed control. Okay? Happen, I'll take it, it's a benefit. We have a lot of that, I don't know what you guys call it, dandelions and that wild mustard. So we have a lot of that. To me, this is beautiful. See, this young man, he says that's perfect. That's ready to plant. And as you can see, this is a heavy clay soil, all the topsoil left 100 years ago. And I'm now working with subsoil and trying to build it up. What happened with this particular farm, it used to lay wet. 3 years of stripping it, and now has dried up. Why? Control traffic pattern and control, down to the line, broken some hard pans. One thing you can't see, and I didn't show. When you pull your stripper out at the end on these beans, you have all these roots hanging on all the knives. And they're freaky. I mean, it's like, you ever been too close to the woods and you pulled up tree roots, on your deep ripper, and when you pull it up, you got this massive wad of roots. Well, all 16 rows have these massive wads of bean roots. Because the growth of that root in it was awesome. It was awesome. We're going to soon have a problem of having too many roots. Wouldn't that be a big problem? Eileen said, no way, Gary, you're drunk. Don't ever come to Purdue because we won't let you in. Well, he said I want to go to college before I die. I figure I can't study agriculture because I'd argue with the professor. I can't study business, I'd argue with the professor. I thought maybe psychology or theology. I'm scratching theology because I'd argue with the professor. Eileen saying, don't go to college, save your money, Gary. There's no hope for you. I gotta pick on Eileen, I love her too much. This once again, and we'll stop here. This is my old plan. This young man says he runs a ridge or a freshener in the spring. So I got to thinking, well, I want to buy a freshener. It's another trip across the field. So when I'm planting, I have to hire a guy to run a freshener. One of the old tricks that we had with ridge till to shred stalks and to to kind of dry out the ridge was run a rotary hoe over it in the spring. Corn stalks won't build up, they'll shred it, it dries up the ridge. So I thought, well, let's look at a freshman. It's a rotary hoe. If you look at one, it's kind of a rotary hoe. So I thought, well, what else am I going to do? These are Sunco fertilizer openers. They're 2 by 2 by 2 by 2. You push them, but yet you pull them. Up front here is 2 pins ahead so that they are pulled. So they won't sway your planter unit one way or the other when they meet any resistance. So I thought if I go 2 by 2 by 2 and then the row unit behind, that should break up any hard soil, shouldn't it? And it should chop up any residue left from my cover crop. And guess what? It does a beautiful job. If I were to cover the middle and with cardboard and just show you where I planted, you said, well, that's beautiful seed bed. And it works up quite nice. Check into them, I like it. Because one, I can put more fertilizer on with my planter, and two, it helps break up the soil. These are strips that I made in the fall. I ran a test of cover versus non-cover. This is unfortunately taken. I got pictures on my cell phone of planting into my cover crop, and it does a beautiful job. I burn it down. I used advice, and one of her talks that she gave years ago when I listened to her, she says, start small, your driest soil, learn how to, burn it down quick. Don't go all crazy over it, and then you can't get it burnt down timely and all that other stuff, and then you're gonna go, oh shoot, I'm not gonna plant cover crop anymore. It haunted me. So I ran a test with Americas when it came to that advice. I now went with a horse planter, and I put the same row units on the front of that, the new horse planter, and now I plant at 8.5 miles an hour. I tried 9.5, and it did quite well. I tried 12, and it did quite well. Why 8.5? Your field isn't that bubble. My guts started hurting. They really did. They really did. And my 7280R has an air ride cab, air ride seat, everything's air ride. I kid you not. I pulled it back. Here's another lesson I learned too. Speed demands horsepower. 16-row planter, all the hydraulics, at 8.5, you run out of horsepower. Same way with the stripper. Faster you go, the more horsepower you need, because speed equals horsepower. That's why with a soil wire, in order for it to work, you need to go 8, 9 miles an hour, and you need a 600. Here's that naughty thing that I do. This is called cultivating. I love it. I've cultivated for 46 years. This is back at my fertilizer cart. Looking forward, this is the new Henniker Color Pro cultivator. It's all on RTK. I'm doing 6.8 miles an hour here. I'd go faster, but I can't put the spray out there at 11 gallons to the acre, only on the row. You'll see that you'll see some grass that I'm going through. The cultivator picks it up and throws it away. The other thing I like about this is this field previously was 220 bushel corn. The amount of residue you have on 220 bushel corn is a lot. So cultivation kind of helps me get this all worked in so that it can start to really decompose. But it's done a good job. This is looking back at my cart. When I'm doing corn, the front tank is Roundup and the back tank is 28%. I put 23 gallon on the acre, of 28 and 15 works out well. When I'm in beans, I connect the two together and I haul 2,000 gallons of Roundup, which will run me 200 acres. I can do 30 acres an hour, So I move. Big fields, small fields, it doesn't matter. I can move. And with RTK, you know what the hardest part about RTK is? When do you eat your sandwich? Because you got nothing else to do. You're sitting there, and that's how I drive my tractor right there like that. And so that 370 has a little refrigerator in it. That's neat. And it's real cold, and I put 3 sandwiches in there. Because I've learned you eat one at 10, one at 11, one at 12, and then you call your wife about 3 or 4 o'clock because you're kind of munchy. You got nothing else to do. It's wonderful. What a great curse it is. So, you know, even my system, this particular field is 140 acre. I have another one that's 200 acres, and everything. Stripping, we want to do straight. Cultivating, we want to do straight. I understand I've got some odd shaped fields. You have a lot of point rows. You start straight, you end up with points. I understand, but you plant straight, cultivate straight, and go straight. Okay? Imagine your herbicide bill right now and cut it in half. My wife said it was July 4th and everybody was going to do fireworks. I know, you said I got 2 hours? Okay. She said everybody else going to a party. Why aren't you? You're out there cultivating. How dumb can you be? She's my wife. And I said, well, I figured out real quick. I said, by doing this, I'm saving $26,000. She said, get your lazy butt out there and start cultivating. Until she found out, why do I do it? That's why I do it. I have so much more. There's a lot. There's a lot you can do with it. There's a lot you can play with. I really think for someone in the 500 to 3,000 acre farm, that you're going to have to look. You young people, you're going to have to look and foster. Okay? He said time. I'm sorry. I run long. I hope I gave you some insight. Anyone got any questions? After my talk, it was lunchtime, and they had to go get our lunches because we had guys staying back in the room, and the guy ran into shows that this never happened before. Any questions?
How about your ESN? Is that in the fall? You said you put something,
Yes.
maybe you put that in the fall. And you said 50 pounds, is that of in or of actual ESN?
Product. So we'll see what that does. I'll try to get the information down here to Eric of what it is I'm doing. I don't know whether it's leached away, or if we're going to have a boost in 100 pounds. I don't know. We'll find out. We're going to test them. The other thing that I really look forward to is playing around with potash. I'm going to push the envelope. This fall, I'm going to do 200 pounds of potash underneath the strip and see what it does. According to Illinois, and I mean, the guys that have tried it, you know, Dave Hula, he's played around with this a lot. And he pushes the envelope all the time. He gets his levels up there. He spoon feeds his crop. He spoon feeds his crop. This is what you're doing. Any other questions?
So do you plant your beans right on top of the pre-existing
Yep.
corn rows?
Yep. I've asked guys that move over 15 inches, why do you move over 15 inches? Too much residue. We have another guy up there that's stripping bean ground going to corn, and then he's he's split rowing his beans no-till into it. And I said, will you see a different growth of the beans over the strip with all the nutrients under it versus the beans between the strip? I don't know. We're going to see. But it stands to reason of what it does. Go into the soil pit of the stripper, and you're going to find the zone is about yay big around where all the fertilizer is and all the roots are. So do you have any other roots going elsewhere? Absolutely. They're looking for nitrogen, water, and everything else. I have a lot of guys say, well, it stops your root growth. It puts it all in one zone. No, it doesn't. It's still sends tillers out looking for it. It doesn't stop there. I've had more comments, you're cutting your roots. Darn right. If you're gonna have shallow roots on my farm and no water, you better die now. Because I'm forcing you to go deep right now. I'm forcing you to go deep. Listen to your older senior partners. We used to cultivate all the time, didn't we? You hated it too because you only went 1 mile an hour. I hated it too. Any other questions?
So when you're putting 200 pounds of potash on with a shank, a small release area, have you ever dug down and seen if, say, corn roots or bean roots, they grow through the zone, or do they want to grow around that fertilizer zone?
When a root finds phosphorus and potash crystal, what happens is right there at that root, it starts building little tiny roots around the grain of fertilizer.
Right.
Meanwhile, it's sending more roots out. So what you're going to see is the roots go in and through, but right there, you see a bunch of small roots. Now, when you broadcast it, it's hunting, it's looking. It's looking for phosphorus, it's looking for potash. It'd be just like, I'm going to take a T-bone steak and I'm going to cut it in small pieces. And I'm going to throw it all around this room. I'm going to turn the lights out, and you haven't eaten for 3 weeks. And I say, now find it. Versus leaving it whole on a plate directly in front of you. Which way are you going to get full quick? So what we're doing is, we're putting the food right where the plant is going to find it. When we broadcast it, it's like, go find it. Sorry, go find it. So yeah, all in one spot.
Have you seen much variation in your soil tests?
We are, this year, we are only going to test the strip only. Between the strips, I don't care about. The only thing I have that soil there for is to keep me from falling through to China. I am focusing on the strip, just like we did Ridgedale. Years ago, we ran samples on the ridges, and we found our fertility on the ridge was twice as high as that between the row. Wonderful. Now I get to cut back my P&K. Once you get your levels high enough, you can start saving. A lot of guys go into stripping and they immediately cut the P&K back 30% and have the same results. I'm saying you can do the same thing once you build it up. Okay?
Have you seen much difference in the past before you're going to test right on the strip on your levels?
No, the way I was doing it with recreational farming, no. I mean, there wasn't as it was, and we had everything all tied up, nice, neat. We didn't have any cover crop, we didn't have any really root growth. We had the traditional flat pan. Now, every good farmer, how many of you carry a spade with you in the back of your truck? You all should raise your hands. Why? Dig up one of your plants. All the time, you need to dig up your plants. Go home and dig up your plants and see what roots, right? We dig them all the time. I gotta tell you, I sinned. Last year I went to my neighbor's bean field. I couldn't get the spade in the ground. I went over to my strips and I went, popped it out, and I had a massive root system with no compaction underneath. I did. I couldn't get it in my neighbor's field. I know we shouldn't put our neighbor's field like that. Okay? So I played around with that.
We have with us Dr. Eileen Condimco from Purdue University. She's in the Agronomic Department. Throughout Gary's presentation, I think he actually gave her quite a nice introduction with all the accolades that he talked about. So he made my job a lot easier. So I owe you even more now. For that, and then for Ed, and things like that.
She's got to live up to it now.
I'm sure she will. I'm sure she will. So, hey, I'm just going to turn it over to Eileen. It's all yours.
Okay, great, thanks very much. And yes, I'm quite impressed that Gary actually remembered so much of what I talked about a number of years ago. So hopefully some of you will remember something that I say today, at least until this afternoon. So what they asked me to talk about today is drainage and its relationship also with cover crop crops and soil health, but with a heavy emphasis on drainage. So kind of shifting gears a little bit here. So basically, you come to a field day or a talk or something like this, and you're thinking about ways to improve your crop productivity on your farm, which you're always doing, right? This is one opportunity to maybe get some new input from folks. Maybe you're considering growing cover crops, and I'm sorry that I missed the first talk this morning by Clint, but you might be thinking about cover crops, you might be thinking about strip till or no-till, and of course you're always looking at other practices to improve your crop productivity and your soil health. But maybe you have some fields that look like this, and that gives you a little bit of a challenge, right? Poorly drained soil, naturally poorly drained soils give us some additional challenges for our crop production. So part of what I'm going to talk about today is how we deal with this. Of course, as you all know, subsurface tile drainage is a very common water management practice that we use throughout central and northern Indiana, and really throughout much of the Midwest, because we have naturally poorly drained soils. So I just want to kind of reiterate or make the pitch about why is tile drainage important. And I realize, of course, that many of you are already convinced about tile drainage, and some of you maybe are not, and are thinking about it on some of your fields. So I just want to talk a little bit about some data that we've accumulated in Indiana over the last 40 years or so that relates to that tile drainage. And how does this tile drainage relate to what the main topic of this field day is about, which is strip till and cover crops? Well, I'm going to give you the benefit of a 36-year study in southeastern Indiana, and some of the results that we've gotten from that. And I have to tell you, which I think most of you know, that 30-year studies are not very common. Okay, so I'm blessed enough that Purdue provided some support over a long-term period during my career, because they wanted some new work on drainage. So drainage pays. Drainage improves timeliness of field work, so that's the first way it pays. Secondly, it improves crop yields, and I'm going to talk about all of these in more detail, of course. Drainage improves cover crop growth. So if you're wanting to grow cover crops, but you have a naturally poorly drained soil, your cover crops probably aren't going to do very well. So handling your drainage is one of the first things that you're going to want to do. Drainage enables other conservation practices, whether that's no-till, strip-till, other conservation practices in addition to cover crops, to work better, to improve your soils. And drainage is a long-term investment, so it's certainly not something that you can decide to do and expect to see an immediate return, although in some cases you may. If it's a very poorly drained soil and you have a wet year after you put the tile drainage in, you may see that benefit immediately. So let's take a look at some of these details. The study I'm going to talk about is not here in ParkeVermillion County. The study was down in Jennings County at CPAC, Southeast Purdue Agricultural Center. And it's a study that was begun in 1983 because farmers in that part of the state had been talking to Purdue and saying, we would like some work on modern perforated plastic drain tube, okay? As many of you know, plastic drain tube just really started coming into its own in the 70s. And this was a soil that was traditionally not tile drained because it was high silt and the water flow was very, very slow. So the old clay tiles just didn't work very well. So Purdue was asked to do some work on that. And about the time that I arrived at Purdue, the state decided to go ahead and fund that drainage research. So I was part of a 4-person team. I was the young person on the team, and the other 3 were all in their mid-50s, very experienced soil and water conservation and engineer, and I was learning a lot from them. The goals of those studies were to take that soil that was poorly structured, poorly drained, low organic matter, high silt, the Claremont silt loam, and first of all, test whether, in fact, drainage could be improved. Secondly, to see whether soil properties, what we would now probably call soil health, but we were focusing on the soil physical properties, whether they could be improved so that we could reduce erosion and reduce crusting, and increase water flow and permeability, And then certainly, of course, to see whether tile drainage would in fact work for improving crop yields. So those were kind of the overall goals that we established back in 1983. The study was established to look at drainage intensity or drainage spacing. My ag engineering colleague wanted to encompass a range of spacings that would be narrower than what we thought would be good and wider than what we thought would be good, so that we could kind of hone in on that. So we had 5, 10, 20, and 40 meter spacings, or 16, 33, 66, and 132 feet. The 40 meter or 132 feet spacing was considered to be our control. It was basically like an undrained control, because on that soil, the soil is so slowly permeable that they said it's basically like you don't even have a drain present if they're that far apart. It was at the standard depth, 2.5 to 3 feet, which kept it above the fragipan, which was the layer that held the water up, the impeding layer, which was at 4 feet on this soil. And standard 4-inch plastic drain tube. And so we basically had these drains, parallel drains, and we had 2 replicates of each of our spaces. We also measured water quality. I'm not going to talk about that today, but I'll be happy to visit with anybody who wants to talk about that later, or point you to an extension pub that we've written on that. As you know, we do design drainage at different intensities, right? If we say we're going to drain a field, it's not like we automatically always put the drains in at a certain spacing. And there is some guidance available on what drainage spacing we might use for different soils. Certainly drainage contractors have a lot of experience with different soils and can make recommendations on what type of drain spacing might be appropriate. We also have a publication that was, and I did bring a few copies, this is available online for free. The print, they no longer stock the print version of this though, so I did bring 10 copies if anybody's particularly interested, and those are out on the registration table. In this, they go through two NRCS guys and a former retired Purdue professor, Doug Franzmeyer, came up with recommendations for spacing for different soils. So you might take a look at that, as well as consulting with drainage contractors. But soil properties obviously are going to affect how close you need to put those tiles, and what depth, and what pattern, and so on. So the study that I'm talking about was installed in February and March of 1983. Those of you who were farming at that time might remember 1983 was kind of dry. It was another drought year. So we put the tiles were installed with the laser-guided equipment, which was the way at the time. And we have a main drain parallel to Highway 50 bit there near Butlerville. And our laterals were going up into the field. We used the wheel trencher machine. And because we wanted to sample the water and measure the water, the laterals emptied into a metal culvert, from which they then went into the main drain out into the ditch. But we were able to sample the water and measure it at that metal culvert. So now I'm going to go into more detail about each of those things that I talked about. Drainage pays. And for any of you who are maybe doing some drainage contracting, I'm sure that you're glad to hear me back that up. That's, I'm sure, your story already. So let's just look at some of the data that we have. Drainage, first of all, improves timeliness of field work. During the first 10 years of our experiment, we were using chisel tillage, spring chisel tillage, which was the common tillage system in that part of the state on this low organic matter soil. They did it in the spring because if you chiseled in the fall, the soil has so little organic matter and so little clay, it just kind of melts together over the winter. So it was really like the tillage didn't do you any good. So they did a spring chisel system. So the first 10 years, each spacing was tilled when it was ready, okay? So if the narrow spacing, if they went out on April 20th and the narrow spacing was dry enough to be tilled, they would till it and then plant it the next day. But if the next widest spacing was still a little too wet, they'd wait, okay? And then they'd till that the next day, and so on. Well, you can imagine what happens is that in some years, the 5 meter was ready, and then the next day the 10 meter was ready, and the next day the 20 meter was ready, and the next day it rained, right? So the undrained didn't get tilled, and then it started over again. So in our first 10 years, the undrained control was delayed anywhere between 1 and 15 days from when our narrow spacing was planted. So that by itself already tells you that probably we were going to have some yield decline where we planted later in those wet years. Some years it was beautiful weather in late April, and so boom, 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 one plot after another, one day after another got planted, and there was very little delay. But obviously drainage is important in your wet years, not necessarily in your dry years. So more timely access to the field is, of course, a great benefit for most of you, even more so than what we had in that experiment, because the farm crew, this was their top priority, and when this field was ready to go, they went, right? It was a 15-acre field. For you folks, you're going to have even more of a benefit by having timely access to the field than by having to wait another day or 2 or 3, and maybe you don't get back to that field at that time. This is just an aerial photo to kind of illustrate that drying and that draining. So it's an aerial photo on which they superimposed drawing of the tile lines. So this is the main field that I'm talking about, and you can see the lighter colored here indicating the soil that is drying out, where we have a lot of drains pretty intensely. And you can see the dark soil here and here, where the soil is still quite wet, and there are no drains there, right? So that's our undrained control. So again, it's just illustrating that drainage, our first question, will drainage work on this soil? Will it drain the soil? Is clearly answered yes, it will drain the soil. It does dry out faster where we have those drains, and that's very visible. There's a lot of data on here. I'm going to talk about a little bit of it. So this is the yields that we got the first 10 years, and then I'll get to the newer data shortly. So the effects on yield, of course, will vary year to year, right? Some years you're going to have more of an effect of drainage than other years. So if you look at the last set of bars here, the 10-year average from 1984 to 1993, we have our narrowest spacing on the left and our undrained spacing on the right. We had a 10 bushel difference between our narrowest spacing and our undrained control, which was frankly disappointing to me as a young researcher and disappointing to the team because we kind of expected bigger yield differences than that, and we'll get to that, okay? Prelude, we're going to get to that. There are bigger differences coming. But part of the issue was that the first 10 years, we had very few years that were wet. We had 2 years, actually, that were wet. And we had many years that were dry. And my senior colleague had warned me of that. He said, now, Eileen, you understand that we've just installed a drainage project. You understand that it's now going to be dry for the next 3 or 4 years. And he was right. But if you look at the yields, we have some years where you have the stair step that you'd expect, the best yield with the narrowest spacing, and then progressively lower yields as it becomes less and less drained. We had other years where the middle 2 drainage spacings had the highest yield. In 7 of the 10 years, the undrained control was the lowest yielding. Okay, so that was pretty clear that drainage was beneficial compared to the undrained. Okay, so yield difference somewhat more modest than we thought. Part of the reason is also because this field is got better surface drainage than many of the similar soil types in that part of the state. And I'll get to that in a minute. The other thing, though, that you might think about is also if you have drainage, you tend to have lower grain moisture at harvest. And that's also a moneymaker, right? You have less drying that you have to do. So in our case, for this 10-year average, the narrowest spacing was at 21% moisture, and the undrained control was 2 points higher, at 23%. So again, if you're needing to dry your grain, that's some money in the bank there that you're saving by not having to dry it as much. Another aspect of timeliness that we don't normally think of as when we say how timely are you in getting in, is how timely are you in getting in, or do you have to get in again? Okay, so replant is kind of another timeliness issue. So the first 10 years I told you we did chisel, and we chiseled each plot when it was ready. In 1994, we switched to no-till, and we planted all the plots at the same time, because now we didn't have to wait for the soil to be suitable for tillage. We just had to wait until that top inch or two was suitable enough for us to be able to plant. So we kind of split the difference between maybe a little too wet for the wide spacing and a little drier than we could have gone for the narrow spacing, and we planted them all the same day. So we don't have that kind of a timeliness test anymore. But, of course, if it continued to be wet after we planted, then you might need to replant. So that happened in a couple of years. Let's just take 2017 as one example. In 2017, all of the plots were planted on May 16th. But if you can see here, these rows that are going off towards the trees here, very short corn here, that was the undrained control that was replanted. Okay, it was replanted on June 2nd because it didn't make it from the first planting. Okay, and then this photo was taken on June 12th. And so you could see to the left and the right of that undrained control, we've got corn that's looking pretty good from the original planting, whereas the undrained control had to be replanted. So that's kind of the extreme of timeliness, right? If you have to replant, you're definitely not timely compared to your standard planting date. Okay, so here's some of the later yields, okay? And they're much bigger differences than 10 bushels, in part because we had a lot of wet years, okay? So these are the corn years between 2007 and 2017. We had a corn-soybean rotation, or a couple of times we had a corn-soybean rotation, right? So we didn't have corn every year. But you can see that there's a couple of years like 2007 and 2011 where there wasn't a whole lot of difference in corn yield among the spacings and the undrained control. But all the other years here on this graph, there's a huge, this light blue on the right, a huge difference in corn yield for our undrained control, whereas the three drain spacings, for the most part, were fairly similar in yield. Sometimes the narrow spacing had a boost. But the main story here is we're talking 50, 60 bushels or more lower where we did not have drainage, which is obviously a huge difference in our yield. So if we look at summarizing that then, over the course of this 35-year study, we had corn in about 24 of those 35 years. This is our results. The 40-meter, or the undrained, averaged 144 bushels per acre. All of the drain treatments were very similar to each other and were in the 160s. Okay, so this is really showing that drainage pays when you look over that long term, which is if you're going to install tile drainage, you're obviously looking for a long-term investment. Sometimes I get asked about, well, how did that yield change with time? And did you see the yield improvement that we know has come with genetics and technology improvements? And the answer is yes, where we had drainage, okay? So this, the dots here are showing every year's yield. It's obviously up and down a lot. And I've connected all the dots here for this bouncy line. But if we just look at the trend over that 35-year period, and you look at the dark blue and the dark yellow here, that trend line is about 1.9 bushels per year yield increase, which is right around the kind of average trend that's happening with our genetics. So where we had drainage, we saw that trend with time. This light blue line, though, you can see is flat. Actually, it goes down just a tad, but it's flat. That's our undrained. So over the course of this 35 years, the yield for the undrained soil stayed constant, right? So no benefit from the genetics and other technology increases that have been happening if you don't have drainage, right? So again, drainage is kind of my main point of this whole talk is drainage is fundamental to doing anything else. Growing your main crop, growing a cover crop, trying to improve soil physical properties. So this is another one. My last slide will also show you some of these extension publications, which are only 1 year old, and they're talking about 35 years, so you're probably not going to pick up any extension publication that's 1 year old that has 35 years, other than these. And I have some of these out at the table, and I've also got show you where you can get them online if you want. Okay, in our case, the soybean yields were not significantly affected. We had soybeans. We had about 10 years of soybeans during that time period in a corn-soybean rotation. The average on all the soybean years from 1994 to 2018, you can see here there's very little difference. Obviously, some years, like 2018, the undrained was much lower than the 3 drainage spacings, but in other years, the undrained was higher than the 3 drainage spacings. So on average, we just didn't happen to see a difference with the soybeans, but we definitely did with the corn. Okay, what about surface drainage? I alluded to this a little bit at the beginning. On this particular field, we do have good surface drainage. I mean, it's flat, but it's not perfectly flat, okay? And the farmers in the area remind me regularly that I have better surface drainage on my field than they have on their Claremont soils. So you would expect that tile drainage is going to have a greater impact where you don't have good surface drainage, right? Where you maybe have little pockets of ponding and so on. So we've got pretty good yield benefits, but it would most likely be even greater where farmers did not have perfect surface drainage. And so I want to show you the impact of the tiles versus none on a field that had less ideal surface drainage, which again, you can all imagine, and I'm sure that you have seen. This was another part of that field where we had a tiled block and an untiled block. And that particular year, the untiled block got planted and drowned out 3 times, whereas the tiled block, in the background here, you can see good corn stover, got planted once and produced well. The untiled block just didn't end up producing at all, okay? It gave up after the 3rd try. So obviously, if you have a spot that tends to get ponded and drowned out, if you have a tile there that can take that water away, then you have a chance at a crop. If you don't have a tile there, then that's your ultimate in yield difference also, right? You have no yield versus a yield. All right, so part of the topic for this field day is cover crops. And on our spacing experiment, we started growing cover crops once we switched to no-till, and we were growing cover crops about every other year after the corn, and then more recently we've been planting them most years, just doing different cover crops. So again, if you're going to take the time and the money to plant a cover crop, you want it to do something. Right? You may have different purposes, whether it's nitrate, whether it's soil health, whatever it is. You want it to do something, so you want it to grow. This was mid-May of 2016. We were growing soybeans that year, so we tend to let our cover crop grow a little longer before soybeans. It also happened to be wet that year down there, so we hadn't really been able to get in to terminate it. So you can see on the upper left here, we've got cereal rye growing. And this is in the tiled area, and we had good growth. We had about 3,100 pounds of biomass, above ground biomass per acre, the day that we were going to terminate it before planting soybeans. However, in the portion of that field, you can see we had a good stand, but it just didn't do much, right? It's pretty puny. Had less than a fourth of the growth that we had where it was tiled. So we had about 700 pounds of biomass per acre. So again, if you're taking the time and money to plant a cover crop, you want it to do something. And so drainage, if it's a poorly drained soil, is going to be fundamental to being able to get that good cover crop growth. This shows data from a few other years. I did show you a year where we had tremendous growth, in part because we let it go longer than normal, because it was a wet year and because we were planting soybeans. So that was 2016, and you can see these are the drained plots, and this light blue bar on the right is the undrained plot, when we're looking at amount of biomass, right? So about 700 pounds compared to about 3,000 pounds. Other years also saw that difference, just not as dramatic, depending on how late we let the cover crop grow. But you can see in every case, we've got less growth on the right-hand bar, the undrained control, compared to where we had drainage. This is a very quick. The Midwest Cover Crops Council, or MCCC, has a cover crop decision tool, which I'll also be happy to talk to anybody about later, if you're not familiar with it. But in that, we basically, you can put in your state and your county, and it pulls up the frost date information for your county. So Park County, Vermillion County, wherever you are. And then you can look at cover crops and the planting dates for cover crops based on what that long-term weather data for your county. But there are other features to that selection, that decision tool as well, like what do you want the cover crop to do? Well, I want to build soil aggregation, or I want to fight weeds, or I want to protect against erosion, or I want to do nitrate scavenging, right? So you can put in your goals, but you can also put in a little bit about your soil characteristics. I mean, very little, okay? We don't even ask soil type. It's just, is it poorly drained? What is the drainage class, and do you have tile or not, okay? So I want to illustrate, again, the cover crop thing and tile. In this case, I pulled up the Park County, ran the Park County one here. I said I had a poorly drained soil and I had no tile. What you can't read, but you can look on the website here, all your cover crops are listed on the left, and then these bars are basically telling you when your planting dates are. What I want to point out is that almost all of the cover crops are grayed out, okay? So I told it that I had a poorly drained soil and no tile. There are very few cover crops left that would be suitable. All of these are grayed out, because it's basically saying those won't grow very well in a poorly drained soil without tile. But what if you say, well, I have that poorly drained soil and I have tile? Voila, they all come back, okay? So it's basically, again, this is a tool that is showing and verifying from not experience and research that's been done over the years that many of these cover crops simply will not grow consistently, adequately on a poorly drained soil if there is not some type of a drainage system present. So again, these green bars are all of the planting dates for all of those cover crops that have now kind of come back because we've dealt with the drainage issue. All right, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. What I just talked about, and I normally spend most of my drainage time talking about, is the drainage, the 4 drain spacing experiment. But what I want to do is briefly talk about that other part of the field that I showed you a picture of, where we had subsurface tile drainage versus none. So we had 2 subfields, right? A tiled block and an untiled block. We're doing chisel versus no-till. And then we had 5 agronomic practices, and the goal for those was to improve soil physical properties. Again, remember, this is a high silt, low organic matter soil, this kind of blah, right? We wanted to improve the soil physical properties. So we were testing some of the agronomic practices. CC in this case is continuous corn, not cover crop. So continuous corn only was our control. And then we had a plot treatment that had a winter cover crop of either wheat or cereal rye. We had another one that had a winter cover crop of annual ryegrass. And I have to say, this was back in the 80s when we did not have as much experience with managing cover crops, but we were looking at the impact of the cover crops. We had another treatment with dry manure spring application, either chicken litter from down the road at Rose Acres or beef cattle manure. And then we had a 3-year rotation with corn, wheat, and an orchard grass red clover mix. We were hand broadcasting these into these plots were 100 foot long, so that it was at least manageable, but we hand broadcast the seed into the standing corn each fall. So I'm just going to show you a few things to illustrate this interaction of drainage and cover crops. So what I'm showing here is the 9-year yield data for tiled versus untiled block. And the first thing I want to show you is where I've got these percentages here. This is basically saying that the tiled in blue for the continuous corn was 12% higher than the untiled. Okay, so where I had continuous corn, 12% higher yield. But where we had those other management practices to try to improve the soil, the yield benefit was more like 20%. Okay, so that's one way to look at this data. The other way to look at it is to just look across all the treatments for the tile. So if we look at the blue bars here, all of these management practices that we were hoping would improve soil physical properties and improve yield, the yields were equal or higher for those agronomic practices than for continuous corn alone, where we had tile. Okay, so they were successful in doing something for the yield where we had tile. Where we did not have tile, the red bars, those agronomic practices were equal or lower. Right? So they were not being consistently helpful where we did not have the drainage. As Gary mentioned, I've also done some earthworm work during my time at Purdue. So from that study, as well as other studies around, earthworm populations were generally higher where we had less tillage, no till, versus chisel. Generally higher where we had tiling versus not. Generally higher where we had other practices like covers and rotations and manure. And the soil physical properties, we measured those periodically, including aggregation or aggregate stability against erosion and infiltration of the water into the field. They were also generally higher. They were affected by cover crops and rotation where we had adequate drainage. Where we didn't have adequate drainage, the effects were less consistent. Underlining the earthworm part, my student Daniel Wellage, who is now graduated and working with you, and I don't know if he's sitting in the room right at the moment. He's back there. Okay. As part of his thesis work 2 summers ago, we were digging some pits on the drainage plots. And to reiterate that earthworm portion, this pit had an incredible number of these earthworm nightcrawler channels all throughout, going down 3 to 4 feet on this particular field in the drained portion. In the undrained portion, there were very few that were present. And this was in the middle of July. It was the hottest week in the summer of 2019. But the night crawlers, of course, they were down. They knew better than to be near the surface, but they were fat and happy down there in that soil. So it was pretty amazing, actually, how large a few of them were. It was almost scary how large a few of them were. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up with a few slides here. So basically, my story on this is that drainage is basically enabling other conservation practices to work better. If you have a naturally poorly drained soil, And you want to use conservation practices such as no-till, cover crops, rotation with hay crops. They're more effective both in improving crop yields and in improving soil physical properties where you have tiling versus not tiling. So I guess my story is you need adequate drainage as your first step to really improving soil before those other conservation practices are going to work very well. Agronomic practices alone are helpful, but they're not going to be very helpful, and they're certainly not going to be up to their full potential if you don't first deal with any drainage problems that you might have. That's, again, reiterating, if you have a drainage problem, you got to deal with that first. All right, and drainage, of course, is a long-term investment. Drain flow actually does develop with time. That's part of what we were trying to get at with Daniel's study, but it does take at least a few years before drainage fully develops with time. Yield effects vary from year to year. Some years you're not going to have any benefit of drainage because it's not a wet year. Other years you're going to have tremendous impact. Conservation practices also take time for them to fully develop, right? 1 year of a soil health building practice is not going to solve all your problems, but the long-term improvement that can be gained by having an adequate drainage system, both in your crop yields and your other conservation practices, make it a good investment. Man, that's nice. Okay, that's my last slide. I put this thing down. So, if you're interested in more details, you can watch video parts 1, 2, and 3. I've talked on 1 and 2, but you can get more detail on that by watching those videos. If you're interested in the water quality story, that's video number 3 up there. And you can get them at my drainage webpage. Or you can read extension publications like this. And like I said, I have a few of them out there. Actually, I have 40 of the executive summary, 1 sheet. And then I have fewer of the others. And you can get those at the education store or at my drainage website as well. So with that, I think I left much more time than normal. I told them that I don't normally have a problem with filling my time, but I actually have more time available for questions than I normally allow. But I don't know if I should let Gary ask me. But I guess I have to. Yes, Gary?
Have you seen that was a 4-inch tile that you did years ago. If I put a 6-inch, can I go wider space? Have you seen the difference in that versus a 4-inch lateral?
You can, it's, generally that's not the way to go. I mean, in other words, if you do wider spacing, then you also need to put them deeper. And so the 6-inch, going from 4 to 6 is not the way to go wider. If you want to go wider, you generally go deeper. Yeah.
The recent years, it seems like the trend is less rains, but when we get them, they're a larger volume of rains all at once. So what's your current drainage coefficient recommendation for new tile systems going in?
Well, that's an excellent question. Not sure whether we have, I don't think we've settled on one specifically in Indiana. I know that in Iowa, and we work a lot with our colleagues there, they've gone closer to a 1/2 inch from the old 1/4 to 3/8. But I'm not sure that we've actually dealt with that directly.
Because they're a loamier soil, so they should get more water penetration quicker than some of a lot of our clayish ground. So
Yeah, I actually haven't thought about it in terms of drainage coefficient lately. We've been talking about, tile drain spacings and so on, and what tends to work without the benefit of thinking about it through that shows you I'm not an engineer, and I don't think about the drainage coefficient first. Yeah, that's an excellent question. Probably closer to 1/2 inch, but I'm not sure.
I think most of the time when you lay out a plan in one of the planning software tools, you're gonna see that we're gonna blow out the 3/8 1/2 inch drainage coefficient no problem when we're doing 4-inch on 40s, and you know, some guys are even going 3-inch on 30s. And when you see that, that drainage coefficient doesn't even come up because we've blown it out of the water.
You ever seen cover crop roots, any plugging in tile lines?
Oh, I was hoping I could get it off of here without somebody asking me questions. Yes. There's also a question about whether it's in some cases, whether it's cover crop roots or whether it's actually corn roots or soybean roots. So sometimes the roots are alive and growing in there, and sometimes they're dead and they have sloughed off and then caught downstream. In some cases, where the roots are is at the juncture. Every place where a lateral is going into a main is where the roots have accumulated, and that's probably because some roots have gotten in there, grown or not, died, sloughed off, and then they start going downstream, and then the juncture is like a log jam. So you have to be real careful with some of the tile systems and how the junctures are made, but a lot of times that's where it seems to be a problem. So where we had external tees, there was nothing sticking into the tile. Where we have internal tees, they cut a hole in the tile and put an internal tee, and it sticks out into the tile a little bit. And sometimes it's got a rough burr on it. And then if roots are in the tile and die and eventually slough off, they start going downstream, they hit that obstruction and they start to build up, and then it's a log jam effect, right? So that you actually are building up dead roots there. So that is not necessarily just cover crops. I've had contractors tell me that they routinely have to clean roots out of tiles on many different kinds of systems. But yes, sometimes cover crop roots do get into the tile and grow and proliferate, and then it's the live roots that are blocking the tile. But I would say that's it happens, but it's not a regular occurrence. One of the things, if somebody's having trouble with that, then we recommend that you consider either a winter kill cover crop so that it doesn't continue to have roots growing all winter and early spring, or if it's one that overwinters, just kill it earlier rather than later in the spring. But yeah, it does occasionally happen, but it's not a regular occurrence.
I've seen plenty of tile systems in Park County, and probably the biggest problem we face is by not running enough solid pipe out from our outlets and having plugs in there for root systems, for trees and scrub along the ditches and dropouts that you guys are dropping outlets through. Nobody's ever cleaned those out, have they?
No, you usually just replace them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I talk to farmers all the time that, they get a suck hole in a field, and whether it's for whatever reason, right, the tile got broken or a groundhog got into it or something else, and you go out and do it's one of those maintenance jobs that you don't particularly want to do, but you gotta do it. So you cut out a 3-foot section and replace it. That's easy for me to say, I understand. Other questions or comments? Okay, well, I think I gave you some time back.
You did a nice job. Let's give Eileen a round of applause. We're going to move directly into the park program presentation with Kurt Lanzone.
Applicators, if you're registered with State Chemist Office through Purdue. Everybody knows the rules pretty much now. 5 years to renew, 3 credits over 5 years, no more than 2 a year. And that's just basically reentering this. That way everybody's familiar with the rules. You can do 2 in a year. Can do an online program. We had quite a few people do that last year, did an online program. The online program does cost $5 more because of development of it, doing an online source. So that's just an option. I know some people have taken that over the last year. One of the things we're going to talk about today is chemical inventory on your farms. Everybody has old jugs of whatever, wherever, stored, stuffed away, that they didn't use for whatever reason. We'll go over some of those reasons. We'll try to help you put a plan in place, you know, to help mitigate that on your farm. A lot of these chemicals are quite costly anymore, right? We spend a lot of money on chemicals, just like Gary was talking about. You know, he cut his in half. You know, what happens if you already ordered this year, everybody had the big craze about how we're gonna run short on this, run short on that. So everybody's stocked up, right? Got chemicals stuffed everywhere. I've seen that in some places, some others have not. So one of the things we can do is try and help mitigate, get those flushed through our system in our farms. I made somebody fall asleep already.
You dropped the phone call.
Just imagine that on purpose. One thing we gotta look at over time, as these products separate, it depends on storage. And I know you guys have seen this all the time. It's nothing new, and this, you know, this just makes it easier for you to see where it's not in a white jug or a shaded jug. You know, you can see the stuff separate. So one of the things that we need to make sure is our active is usually pretty good, but the co-formulants don't bind with it. And able to deliver that active ingredient to our pest, whatever it is. All of our chemicals on the farm don't have an expiration date on them, right? So how do you know if it's good or not? Just guess. Sometimes. We'll go over some of the things that we can do to check that, but you know, all of our medicines, all of our food, canned goods, they're all going to have an expiration date on them, or a best by date. How many of your chemicals have a best by date on them? Anybody? So when we start looking at stuff that the state chemist office oversees, about the only thing that you'll see that has a date on it is a lot of these things that they're using for bacterial sites, things of that nature for, you know, the COVID stuff, because it's something that you can't see the reaction of. There's probably, you know, some products in ag that we can think of that they should probably have a date like that on them. But if we follow some of our recommendations where we use them in 2 to 3 years, we're probably okay. If we look at insecticide, we can see the results. You know, you go out there after you sprayed Mustang, something like that, you're going to see the results, right? You hope. Herbicide, you see the results from it. We go out there. Hopefully, we took care of, you know, any escape weeds that we had. Fungicide. You think you see the results from it? Hopefully in the yield when we run the combine through, but you can't go out there and see and make a definitive assessment that you're seeing the benefits all the time. And that's one thing that maybe, you know, we need to make sure we use for sure. Fungicides are very expensive, and we want to make sure we keep those in rotation for sure. Just like I said earlier, some of the stuff through the state chemist's office that is approved does have, but it's not very many ag chemicals. In general, a supplier is going to stand behind their product for 2 to 3 years from when they invoiced you for it. So, Serious Solutions, they sell you a product at the farm. You come back and you say, well, it didn't do this or that, whatever you're trying to control. Are they going to stand behind it? Probably take care of it. Probably depends if your bill's paid up, but we won't tell them that, right? One of the things along those lines, you know, they want you to use that product because they want to sell you more. They want to keep it circling through the system. You know, I know there's a lot of Liberty sitting on farms right now that was bought up this year. A lot of Roundup, you know, it's still going to be covered next year. Are we gonna see improvements in formulations? That's one of the reasons why we do try to use our products in here. Now, is the price of those gonna go up? What do you think? How many chemicals have gone down in price every year? Huh?
It's unethical.
Yeah. So we're gonna go through some suggestions of storage. I know one of the things that a lot of us don't read real well when we're doing applications is the labels. We have labels on the products. We're supposed to follow that label by law. You know, that's our job as the end user of that product, is to follow the label. If we look, every one of them is going to have how to store it written on it. It's going to give us specific directions. It's also going to give us specific directions in disposal, to where if we have something on our farm for a long time and we want to get rid of it, you know how to get rid of it. Some common things that we see in these, you know, keeping it above 32 degrees. We see that quite often, right? We don't want crystals to form. You know, separating the products like what we seen earlier in those jars. A lot of them, you don't want it above 100 degrees for extended periods of time. So maybe it's not the best to have it sitting in your machine shed where it's uninsulated, where the temperature is getting above 100 degrees today, I'm sure. Anybody else's machine shed warm today? I'm sure. The other thing is making sure we have a controlled environment in the wintertime. We've stored those over the winter. So anytime you buy a product, you know, we want to make sure we read the label. That way we know what it says. The other thing that's important is to make sure you have some kind of system in place to store it and shelf it. You know, we deal a lot with a lot of the bulk containers now, as we've gone into that stuff, but we still have quite a few of high dollar chemicals that are in a lot smaller quantities that need to be protected from freezing and higher temperatures. One thing that caution you on anytime, and some of the serious people that are here can tell you, you know, don't buy more than 2 years. And they say, oh, well, that's just because, you know, trying to move the price, things of that nature. No. There's a lot of improvements in chemical formulations that can happen in 2 years. Everybody in this room, well, maybe not everybody, but quite a few people in this room are using different chemicals than what they used last year. We've got new releases of beans, you know, not using some of those chemical formulations that we were, new technology, and it's always changing. If you think about the stuff that my grandparents used when they were farming, it's a heck of a lot different in some instances than what we use now. And, you know, if you take somebody from that generation, they used the same stuff for 10 years. How many times have we changed in 10 years? Trying to take care of weed escapes and things of that nature. When you buy a product, we're going to give you another suggestion. Place a visual identification thing on the container. So, what do you think is a good visual identification thing? Just write the date on it. What's up? Everybody's got Sharpie markers in their shops, right? Another thing we'll talk about, if we're using the same chemical a lot, rotating the stock. Using the older stuff first. That way you don't have a buildup. So you get a delivery from the co-op or whoever, and just sit there and slide it right on the front of the shelf, right? Because it's easier to put away. We don't need to move that one in the back to the front. If I come home and I went to the store and I take a loaf of bread and put it on the front of the shelf, my wife will have my hide. Because guess what's going to happen? It's going to mold, right? You can see that direct result. A lot of the chemicals, we can't see things like that. I talked earlier about formulation switching, you know, changing things up. We see that a lot. Sometimes we'll see stuff go from a liquid to a powder formulation. We've seen that some. You still want to make sure you use up all the stuff that you already paid for, right? Why wouldn't you want to? You don't want to write a check again for something that's sitting there on the shelf. So make sure you're using all the old product up. We're seeing this example, everybody knows Fred, right? Everybody's heard Fred Whitford talk. You know, he's talking about the price changes here. And how the one on the right, where it's really separated, is still old, the label's coming off, and it's going in the dumpster. Well, not the dumpster, but the box away day program. You know, we got two acclaim jugs up here. Why do you think somebody wrote old acclaim on it? It's really old, right? So what should be done with it? You could do that. Probably not the best idea if it's got some age on it. One thing we always talk about is try to keep our products sealed. You know, that way we don't have water intrusion into some of these wettable powders and stuff. That way we don't have problems getting them to mix. You know, we don't have moisture issues breaking down. Zidua, everybody knows it, it's real common. You know, it's granular. It don't take much though, does it? Keep it sealed. That has a tight screw on lid for a reason. See more and more of the Roundup Quick Pro in retail markets. I've been to numerous, I'll say smaller farm, hobby farm size, that have stuff like this where they're spraying fence rows and stuff like that for their animals, and you go up there and you see this sitting out on the pavement just like this with the cap on it. Is that a good practice? No. See other things, I see a lot of stuff. I don't focus just in ag, and Phil can tell you the same thing. We do a lot with homeowners and stuff like that. You know, you can see bags like this that aren't sealed. You know, they're going to have the same kind of problems. Anytime we have a product that's been sitting for a while, or before we're going to use it, we need to make sure we agitate it. That way we get those co-formulants mixed up, everything working together. That way it can deliver that active ingredient to the pest that we desire. We see here we got good separation. You know, insecticides are really, really key to get mixed because there's usually a smaller amount of active ingredient in there. You know, a lot of us deal with things like this. We have larger sizes that we're carrying. Now, what happens when I have a mini bulk? How do I mix it up? 60 mile an hour, hit the brakes, right? One thing I want to remind you, another suggestion is to make sure you try and use those open containers in the same season. Now, does that mean mix an extra hot batch? No. But we need to make sure we use it, right? We don't want stuff laying around from 3 years ago that was worth a ton of money. You know, we don't want that. That costs our bottom line. And with inputs going higher every day, it seems right now, that's stuff we got to watch for next year. So just go over a summary. You know, we want to read our directions on our labels. That's our job anyway, right? We were taught that when we did the private applicator class to start with. We want to store in a controlled environment, keep our supply low. We want to have a date on our containers. We want to rotate our stock. That way we don't get in trouble for having old moldy bread in the house. We want to use up what is being replaced. We want to keep our products sealed. We want to shake the containers, and we want to use up those partials. So what do we do when we have products that are older than 3 years? You know, you walk into your storage area, the first thing, where's the stuff that's good? If you don't have the date code on it that you wrote, how do you know? You know, when you look at something like this, that's what they spray up there in Montezuma, the river columns. It helps take care of the lead, right? Do we even know what that is? Well, about 15 years ago, everybody shipped that, what was it with the red cap? I don't even remember it anymore. Another thing we got to look at is the product still registered. You know, we've gotten into some hairy stuff last year with dicamba labels, right? People were trying to source it as fast as they could because that way they could take possession. Got some stuff. How long has it been since Ortho used this kind of bottle? This is good for my lawn and garden class. Because you'd be surprised at what's sitting in people's garages.
They're under their sink.
Or under the sink, yeah. Not a very good place to store product, is it? Because I'm sure it's got restrictions on it as well. You know, what were the storage conditions? Did we store it properly? You know, this one, above 32 degrees, what happens if it froze? Is it as good as what it was before? Probably not. Has it been opened? If we look at the package, you know, how long has it been around? You know, is it something that we should flush through our system pretty good, pretty quick? You know, if we sit here and have a date on it, you know, that's easier for us to track. The other option is, how else can we track how old something is that's in our possession? Any ideas? You might have an invoice from it, but who knows? It might be, you know, serious. Do they put lot numbers on their invoices? No. These products have lot numbers. If we look right here, which I don't have a close-up of it, it has a manufacturer code on it. And you can take that to the manufacturer and they can tell you exactly when it was manufactured in their facility. Now that doesn't mean that's when you took delivery of it, but it'll give you a good idea. So, when we look at those codes, is it easy to get the information? No. But can it be done? Yes. So if you have a large quantity of something sitting on a shelf somewhere and you want to know about it, contact the representative that you bought it from or that you're working with, and they'll be able to go back and help track that down by contacting the manufacturer. When we look at stuff, you know, we look at the age of the product, how it was stored, you know, is it going to be good? Is it an open container? Is there physical characteristics? Like the cottage cheese that we seen earlier with the red cap. You know, we can do a jar test like what we've seen, you know, at the very front of the slide, where we can pour it in there, see how much we can get it to actually reconstitute. Talk with the manufacturer if you have to. On some chemicals, we can mix up a little spray tank. How many got little spray tanks that they go around and spray little jobs? You know, 10-foot boom on the back of your buggy, four-wheeler, whatever. You can mix up a batch of that. We can set those pretty easily anymore as producers. You can go through and see if it does what it's supposed to do before you dispose of high dollars of material or make excessive passes across the field. If we question it, we're going to dispose of it, right? How do we dispose of it? Purdue, with the Office of the Indiana State Chemist, you know, we offer a lot of toxicologies across the state of Indiana in different regions where you can dispose of those for free. If anybody has any questions about signing up for one of those, in our county, they can call me. In Vermillion County, they can call Phil, and we can help get you the dates. That way you can get rid of stuff that you don't want sitting around. It's not a problem until somebody comes and visits, right? So, rather than throw money away, just read the storage directions. Try and control the environment. You know, date the containers. That way you keep your rotation going. Keep the product sealed. Shake the containers before you use them. That way you get all the actives and coformulants mixed up. And use up the partial containers as soon as possible. Because the main thing I don't want you to have happen is throw good money away. And I think a lot of us that are here today want to make sure that you don't. So, if there's anything I can do to help you manage your pesticide inventory or get rid of your products, let me know. Enjoy the rest of the day, guys. See you out there for your registration.
On the last thing, Sam's been doing lunch, so whenever we know for sure it's ready, we'll get you that way. Smitty's gonna be my. You're gonna be my scribe. So right there's 3 cereal grains. Can you name what they are? Got rye. Well, you're blind. Put your glasses on. That's right too. That's right too. So they're all cereal rye. That's good. So we got an Elbon cereal rye. We've got BNS cereal rye. We've got a Rustic cereal rye. So that is certain varieties. We'll have it up here. You can look through some of this stuff. Some of the stuff we'll talk about in the afternoon. But looking at them, they are all different. They are all going to act different. They're different sizes, even. So specifically, your Elbon rye is going to be a lot smaller than your Rustic or your BNS. In this geography, most guys are going to probably want to plant more of an Elbon cereal rye because if we know the germination, the growth, the maturity, we know this is going to be the early part of May. So first week of May is when, if we're going to crimp or terminate, this is when we can do it. BNS, we don't really know, it could be anywhere from the first week of May to the last week of May. A Rustic is going to be a little earlier than a BNS, but it's going to have more tillers, so if you're looking to just crimp, that may not be your best option. So I'll leave these on the table. I've got more of these for the rest of this stuff that we'll see at the plot. But just one thing to know, that just when you're buying rye, there's certain things that are gonna be different about each one. So know what your goals are. Like I said, we're gonna use an Elbon cereal rye because we want to crimp, and we want to crimp in a timely fashion that's going to fit our planting window. I'd like to have all my beans planted in April, but that's not realistic for us. So if we can have the first week of May and crimp, that's very good for us. So just some things to think about. We can talk through some of that stuff later. You lucked out. See, Les, I had you Smitty, but you were out of the room, so you got lucky. But so the things I need to talk about is first off, it's called the STAR program. Many of you from Illinois have been a part of this for many years. Vermillion County, Indiana, and Park County, Indiana, just within the last couple of years have started to implement this into our soil and water growers. So what it is, it started in Champaign County, Illinois. It's called Saving Tomorrow's Agricultural Resources. Really, a simple way to put it is a self-assessment for producers to understand how well they are doing with their nutrients, their soil, those things. It's just a 1 to 5 star rating. You fill out a one-page paper here, or there's a website, starfreetool.com now, that you can fill out fields. And like I said, you get that rating, and if you get, say, a 2 or 3 star rating, you feel like it should be higher, that's where kind of I can come in and talk to you about what's it going to take to get your star rating up, or why did you get this rating versus that rating, and that's where we can kind of have some open dialogue. Why this is a big deal, why we think it can be implemented here, is essentially food grade buyers. So specifically Bunge and Danville, Frito, those buyers are looking at practices that we're doing. This is a simple form for them, and they can have what practices are being done on their growers and the grain that's coming in, and then they can tell Kellogg's or General Mills or essentially Walmart, which is driving all of it, what we're doing on the farm. Now, do they know what they want? No. I mean, bluntly, they really don't. They just want to be able to say that our grain is sustainably sourced or whatever that is. STAR is just kind of a baseline to kind of get that off the ground. So if you're interested in talking more about this, that's where feel free to catch me, Deb, Eric. We're all very much involved. Like I said, starfreetool.com. You can fill out the application there and get your scores. For specifically ParkeVermillion County producers, in your packets there should be some enrollment cost share applications, specifically for new cover croppers or in Vermillion County cover croppers that are advancing what they're doing, I guess. There are caps to these, $20 an acre, up to 100 acres. They only have a certain pot of money that's available, but if you are interested, especially in starting out, this is a good way to start. I am available to help make cover crop mixes. Okay, so we're not just breaking the bank and planting a bunch of rye because that's what the little book says. You've got to plant 75 pounds of rye and it's going to cost me $20 an acre. No. This year, we plan on having cover crops on about 2,000 acres. Our average seed cost to get to those 2,000 acres is going to be $10.11 in seed. So, I've spent a lot of time building mixes on Excel, getting our prices, and going off of that, and how do we, I only have this much dollars to spend, what am I going to use? For example, Elbon cereal rye versus VNS cereal rye. If you price these, I did this myself, VNS cereal rye per pound is going to be cheaper than Elbon. And I looked at that every time and I said, never mind, I don't want to do it because I don't want to spend more money. VNS cereal rye has approximately 18,000 seeds per pound. Elbon cereal rye has approximately 23,000 seeds per pound. So just for rough sakes, we'll say we're going to plant 50 pounds of VNS. So that's 900,000 seeds per acre. That is only 39 pounds of Elbon to get to that same 900,000 seeds per acre. When you compare those, that's where your Elbon is actually cheaper per acre. It costs more per pound, but it can be cheaper per acre. So when we start getting certain varieties and understanding how many seeds we're actually planting as opposed to just talking pounds, that's where we can probably save ourselves some money from time to time. The way I equate it is we don't talk about, so I'm going to plant 10 pounds of corn per acre. We say we're going to plant 34,000 or 36,000 seeds per acre. Same way with beans, we're talking 140, 150, 160 as opposed to how many pounds we're planting. So if we get to our cover crops to where we're talking seeds per acre, I think that's going to give us a more level playing field when we start comparing prices and as we start to understand what we want out of our cover crops. So that's kind of my spiel for now. You'll hear more about that afterwards in the afternoon. That's probably all that I have for now. I don't get a question. I guess if I have questions, no, shut up and get to lunch. Okay. I will say, Eric might be taking care of most of this, but once we're done with lunch, there's going to be Eric and some of our staff will go over and start to get things things set up. Approximately 12:30, we're planning on meeting here, so probably 12:25-ish, I will make an announcement. And there's going to be signs to the demo site, but I will leave. I'm parked right over here in a Chevy, silver Chevy, and I will lead the charge over there, and you can follow me. I'll try not to drive too fast and some windy roads, but that's kind of how we're going to transition to the afternoon if you're going over to the field. We do have some cover crops, we'll talk about that, and we do have 3 strip till bars that we will be running live demos this afternoon. So.
All right, thank you, Carter. And again, just to reiterate, Carter is available to ParkeVermillion County producers for free consultation. That is part of the CWI grant, Clean Water Indiana grant for ParkeVermillion counties. Were awarded several years ago, and so that's how we've been able to retain Carter on staff for any of your soil health transition questions. Whether it's cover crops, whether it's transitioning over to more of a conservation tillage program. That's why we have Carter on staff, and he does a fantastic job. So please feel free to utilize his services. And again, it's all free to have him come out. So we have lots and lots of people have his cell phone number and call and text him at all hours of the day and night to get information about their operation. Okay, a couple of quick housekeeping things before we turn over to lunch. First of all, I want to thank the Friendly Grove Ladies Auxiliary for preparing our lunch today. They have been on the other side of that wall right over there, diligently working to get the meal ready, and it's going to be fantastic. I don't think you're going to be disappointed whatsoever. Once we get done, we're going to dismiss from this side of the room. We're going to go out, and there's a door right there by the cabinets. We're going to enter that doorway. The serving line will wrap around in an L shape. You'll come out this door by the coffee pots where Carter is. Tea, lemonade, water will be right there. And that should help us keep the flow going. So we'll start on this side of the room and work our way over. We have a drawing to do real quick. Again, this is for a complimentary registration to the National No-Till Conference, thanks to No-Till Farmer Magazine. And so we have randomized, we've numbered the names in a random order, and then I'm going to use this cool little app on my phone called a randomizer to get the number. So this is, we're totally random, all right? So
What was your number?
I'm not on here.
Producers only.
Oh, yeah, just producers only. So I have to wait for the ad to get done. Number 16. And number 16 is Doug Burgess. Doug Burgess is our winner for the complimentary no-till.
That had to be raised.
Hey, I took
So
care
proud to present you with this no-till complimentary registration.
That's actually sponsored by the Cow.
All right, and finally, I'm going to ask. I want to thank Greg Major and his family for preparing the demo site that we're going to go to after lunch, helping get the strip still bars squared away, preparing the site. They've done a lot to help us in assisting with that.
Coming back out here with us. When we planned this field day, we were going to be having cover crops bigger than this, better than this, and it was going to look awesome, and then we were going to strip till through it. And you know, as farmers, weather dictated a lot of what we were going to do. So the plan was, and this is Greg Major. Greg, you can raise your hand. This is his farm that we're on. Again, thank you to him for letting us use that. There are drinks over here. There are koozies, thanks to Autumn Major for those. So it is hot, so get your drinks and keep them cold. But this is Greg's farm, and obviously they had wheat. This is the first year they had wheat, and it's trying to add diversity, try to grow nitrogen, those things. So when he said that, we said, well, hey, that sounds like a good place to have a field day. Can we do that? And he said yes. And then we said, can we go make a bunch of strips in the field and tear up your no-till? And well, I guess. So he's letting us strip till. He's letting us kind of have free reign. And I believe he's gonna come back and plant to this mix, minus the cockleburs, hopefully. Yeah, that is not NRCS recommendation, the cockleburs. But so the hope was he was gonna harvest late June, have this planted by July 4th, be up, lush, everything. Well, if you had wheat this year and you got it cut by July 4th, good luck. And we got ours cut ourselves on July 5th and 6th, cut till 10 p.m. both nights, and got it done. And then it rained on the 7th, and probably the 8th and the 9th and the 10th, and it was late for them to get the wheat out. And about every day, Greg's like, I think it's gonna go today. I think it's gonna go today. And we had it scheduled for like a Tuesday, and then it was gonna be Wednesday, and then Thursday, and then Friday, and finally Saturday. I came over, and his son Justin and I were out here, and bluntly, it was a muddy mess. Should not have done it, but it was July 21st. I knew we were a month out, and if we did not get anything planted, we were going to have nothing. So I said, can we at least please plant the plot? And we did. And so that's what all these seeds in these jars up here, starting from that side, this is mix 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to kind of talk about those, and that's what you have on your sheets. You see we have like a mix 1. I'm just going to kind of go through and talk some of these. And we've got seeds up here, and you can see these. We could talk through some of this. So what I kind of want to talk about is, when are we going to plant these things, and what's going to winter kill, and how are we going to terminate the other things in the mixes. So not everything out here is what we would plant after wheat. Some of it is after soybeans, some of it is after corn. Again, what are your goals? Are your goals just weed suppression ahead of soybeans? I got an easy answer for that. If you want to know an answer ahead of corn, I do not have a good answer for that. Got a few things that might work, but we got to get them planted at a timely manner, and it's hard. Cereal rye ahead of soybeans works every time. It's awesome. So if you look at mix 1, that is this: oats, radish, crimson clover. That is kind of a base after soybeans going to corn. If you look, your oats and radish will winter kill. You would have a crimson clover. Generally, I put 2,4-D or Roundup, just because that's a basic one that for termination next spring, most guys are going to be running. So your oats and radish would terminate. Your crimson clover is what you would plant into next year. The hope with that is your crimson clover is going to produce some nitrogen, and then that nitrogen is going to be released to the corn crop once you terminate. That's the thought process. That's why guys are doing that. You really need to have that one planted in September. So if you have seed corn harvest, if you have silage that's going back to corn or anything like that, or just some short group soybeans, that's a good option ahead of corn. Not going to be a lot to manage in the spring. The second mix on there, this is what we at Morgan Brothers LLC will run ahead of about half of our corn acres. It is oats, Elbon cereal rye, hairy vetch, Balanza clover, dwarf Essex rapeseed, and radish. And you notice the pounds there. We're only running 10 pounds of oats. I've got the seeds per pound. 15 pounds of Elbon, a pound of hairy vetch, a pound of Balanza clover, a third of a pound of rapeseed. You do not need very much rapeseed.
It has such a great root system. You get too much of that, that is where we had guys having roots in tile line issues and clogging tiles. Bluntly, that was what that was, and it was a lot of pounds of rapeseed. In Canada, where a lot of it's raised, to harvest they will plant about 2 pounds of rapeseed. So that's a harvestable amount. So just for reference. So in that mix, our oats and radish will winter kill, and we would plant our corn into Elbon cereal rye, hairy vetch, actually Viper Balanza clover, and dwarf Essex rapeseed. The Elbon cereal rye and the Viper Balanza clover should be our earliest maturing species that we can get of that, and our goal with that is to crimp. The local Soil and Water right here has a 20-foot, Vermillion County has a 20-foot crimper that is able to rent for local producers. So if cover crops get out of hand, gets wet year, gets late, they can use that to help terminate their cover crops. We have one on our farm, and we plan to use it to crimp, and then that helps us spray later and has helped us minimize our herbicide use. So then as we're coming in, if we crimp that or if we just spray it, obviously the cereal rye Roundup is a good grass killer. It's going to take care of that. Your Balanza clover, your rapeseed, a 2,4-D, dicamba, something that you'd have in there. Hairy vetch, 2,4-D, it is scared. Hairy vetch is scared of the smell of 2,4-D. I believe Mike Plummer at one of the no-till conferences had a slide where he took a 2.5 jug of 2,4-D, opened the cap in the middle of a plot like this of hairy vetch, and the wind was blowing this way, and just the smell of it, you could see it just tapered out and killed the hairy vetch that was right there. So if you got hairy vetch, you want to terminate it, a little bit of 2,4-D, we'll handle that pretty easily. Not going to walk through these because bluntly there isn't anything out there. Everything we've got in all these mixes is right here, and we'll be able to go through this, and I'll be able to talk through some of those. If you have questions as we go, feel free to ask. I've just got this stuff on my head, kind of on repeat. So if I talk too fast or anything, just feel free to ask. The next mix is a mix that you might, if you had some wheat or something, you might put out this time of year. So it is oats, radish, buckwheat, Balanza clover, and sorghum Sudan grass. This is the first time we've talked about buckwheat. That is my favorite cover crop personally. You see a butterfly coming in right there already. These white flowers, actually I just moved a bee off of that. That is buckwheat. To my point exactly, that is your pollinator guy that's going to pull it in. Bees, butterflies, anything that needs pollinated, your buckwheat is going to be the one that pulls those in. And it is, if we had a good stand out here, you could walk through here and you could just kind of hear a little hum of how many are out here. The sorghum Sudan grass, that is going to be some of your soil loosening, soil building. You don't want to get very late in the season with that, but that's where after wheat is a better option. And so you could get it to grow now and have some success that way. I kind of talked about it earlier, the 3 different cereal ryes that I had Smitty explain what they were. If you see, we planted about 40 pounds of Elbon, 50 pounds of Rustic, and 50 pounds of VNS. And again, like I said in the meeting, Elbon is going to be 1 plant, 1 tiller. It's going to crimp easily. It's got more termination methods than even like a VNS, because we know when it's going to happen. Again, back to the crimper. That's why we're going to run Elbon, because we can crimp it, we can spray it. You can chop it and bag it if you have cattle or anything like that. So it's a pretty versatile option. Your Arustic is going to be an early maturing as well, but like I said, it's going to have more tillers. So as you're coming through crimping, it's going to have a tougher time getting a good enough control, because there's more plants that we have to, or more mass in a plant that we have to crimp. Your VNS doesn't necessarily mean it is a mixture of everything. That just means it could be a mixture of everything. VNS cereal rye could be 100% Elbon, it could be 100% Arustic, it could be 100% Wheeler, it could be a mixture of those. What you're paying for is the license and the label that says this is what it is. But again, when I take it back to corn and soybeans, I don't go to my DeKalb rep and say, hey, I just want 108-day corn. I don't care if it's 3 different hybrids. We want a specific hybrid for this ground. Especially around here, you've kind of heard it talked. We have sand, what we call sand and gravel. I have a different hybrid I want there versus what I want on my black ground versus what I want on my clay. So kind of the same thought process with these cover crop mixes. The last one is the one, if you flip the page over. Any questions? I guess I'm kind of going through this pretty fast. We'll get you to the cool tools and get you home out of the heat pretty quick, probably. So this is what this 11-way mix is. This is what it looks like. This is what all the seeds are. If you have questions, I can help kind of tell you what's what in there. But if I step back in here, just kind of going through, if you want to come closer, you can. If you don't, that's fine. Just kind of naming off things and what they're going to do for us. So like I said, buckwheat, that's going to be our pollinator. You got some oats here. That's going to be our quick growth, our grass. Those will winter kill. Radishes. Oh yeah. So buckwheat, don't ask me where it comes from because I don't know, but it brings up phosphorus from somewhere. There's been plenty of studies. I think it brings it from the air. I don't know. I could try to BS you, but I'm not going to. So there is some phosphorus that is brought in from our buckwheat, nitrogen or phosphorus scavenging, those things. So there's some benefits there. Do what? Yes, those are cowpeas. They kind of look like soybeans out here, but those are cowpeas. Again, they're a legume. That's going to be our nitrogen, part of our nitrogen production. It's a very big seed. Those are going to winter kill. So again, that's not something that you want to be planting more than likely after corn and beans. I got lucky one year and recommended them for a guy. He spread them on September 1st and they looked great till October 10th or whatever when we got a frost, and he was tickled to death. But radishes, right here, there's probably a bigger radish around here somewhere. Again, that's going to be our taproot nitrogen, or not nitrogen, our compaction breaking cover crop. Again, it's just going to be a nice taproot there. Here's a, thanks. Probably should, man. I was in the middle of a good talk. Now now we got to end it. No, thundering. This is a measly looking guy, but that is sun hemp. Again, that's going to winter kill, and that's going to be some nitrogen production as well. Sunflower is exactly what it sounds like. If you look, I don't know if I can pull it up. This is what a dwarf Essex rapeseed looks like. So this is what we use instead of radishes. Again, it's cheaper than radish. I can get more seeds out there at a lower cost, and it is going to give you compaction breaking as well. It will not winter kill, shouldn't, and you would have it growing next year. How big does it get? It can get 4 foot tall. I mean, it's going to be it's going to be big next year. But I will say this because I'm not the guy that runs the corn or the bean planter. We plant everything into big stuff so it doesn't bother us. It doesn't bother me in particular. It may bother my uncle and my brother, but we're used to planting into big covers.
Kill off easy.
Kill off easy. Probably not as easy as some would hope. Definitely have to have some sort of good broadleaf, preferably probably a dicambo or a 2,4-D or something. Roundup is more than likely not going to be enough to handle it bluntly. What else? Bluntly, I can't remember which one's which. Pearl millet and sorghum Sudan grass are going to look almost identical. It has something to do with the bases. I can't remember which one's which. One of these is sorghum Sudan grass. One of these is pearl millet. I think that's pearl millet. That's sorghum Sudan grass. Again, grass is there. Hairy vetch. That is the one I get a lot of questions about. I saw some over here. Here we go. So that is hairy vetch. It is what it kind of sounds like. It gets pretty hairy. You can see on the ends it's kind of twirling. If you remember earlier, I talked about we had cereal rye ahead of our corn and at like 5 or 6 way mix. Why did we have that? We had that so our hairy vetch can grow up our cereal rye as opposed to grow out along the ground. The thought with that is that's going to give us a better chance to plant through it, because bluntly, when this stuff gets to be 6 foot tall and it's running all around the ground, that's the one that's going to wrap your sprockets and your chains. And I see Smitty shaking his head. He's planted through it. That's the one that can be an issue. Great nitrogen production, going to be there next year, but if there is a downside, it's hairy. It's hairy for a reason. Let's see here. Sun hemp, Balanza. Right now, you're not going to tell the difference between a Balanza clover or a crimson clover. If I told you it was one or the other, most people aren't going to know a difference. It is what it's a clover, and at this stage, it's pretty small. But again, that's going to be part of our nitrogen production that's going to be there next year. Any questions about anything through any of this right now? Comments? Full of crap? Something doesn't work? Something I said is totally wrong? Price per acre for this mix? I don't sell it, so I don't know. Now, this mix right here probably is going to run you about $30 the acre. Now, I will tell you, all right, bluntly, we've had wheat in our rotation for the last 7 years. We will not have wheat in our rotation this fall. Several factors. One, bluntly, is commodity prices have gotten better. Two, our thought when we started going down this path was we were going to be able to produce more nitrogen. We were going to be able to cut back nitrogen. We were going to scavenge phosphorus. We were going to be able to do all these things that I heard at the No-Till conference that this works. And you know, we're going to raise our organic matter and you know, in December and January, it all sounds great. And the reality is when we get back to the farm, I don't know what we did wrong, but we weren't, it just wasn't there. The reason, especially if you ask my brother and I, the reason we plant wheat now is because we're going to tile, because we'd rather tile in our shorts than we would in a freaking parkas. So we want to tile when it's warm instead of when it's just freezing cold. So that, if we have wheat out anymore, that's going to be our reason for doing it. So if you're not going to put wheat in, this mix pretty much is for naught. So really we're looking at the mixes we have over there, so we are really limited. So you have an oats, radish, crimson clover, a head of corn. You have maybe that 6-way, but again, it needs to be, most of these need to be in September. Your cereal rye can be planted anytime you want. Christmas, if you really want to. It's going to grow. You may not have much fall growth or any fall growth, but your roots will continue to grow, and when the snow comes off in the spring, all of a sudden you'll have a green field, be able to plant into it, or terminate and plant into it. However you want to manage it, it can be done. So like your cereal rye, those mixes, like a VNS at 40 pounds to the acre without a mixing charge, you're probably looking at about 10 bucks an acre. So mixed and delivered, you might be $12 to $15 an acre ahead of soybeans. But I mean, I had a conversation with Greg yesterday. He's been at this for several years, and he's telling me that he has reduced his herbicides by at least 50%. Well, if you spend $15 on this side, you're going to save your 15 or more on this side. Another thing to kind of think about, specifically with water hemp. Water hemp grows and grows and grows and grows and grows, and pretty much almost 12 months out of the year, I swear that stuff germinates. But if you look, it really doesn't germinate in the early spring as much. Most of it is as we're planting or as we're getting later to planting. Also, water hemp has to have sunlight to germinate. Not all weeds or plants have to have sunlight as well as water to germinate. So if we can keep a crop canopy, which that's what we talk about on our farm, is overlapping canopies or are as good or better than overlapping residuals, then that is going to help us get good weed control. So instead of going out and spraying March 3rd to get weeds that are not going to germinate for 2 or 3 more months, and we have that 3-week residual in there, and we're just getting to April 1st, oh crap, now we got to spray again. So now we're almost guaranteeing ourselves we're going to spray 3 times, and we still may not like the weed control. Whereas with us having a good cover crop stand, specifically planting our beans green, that's specifically what I'm talking about here, is water hemp more so in beans. We plant our beans green, and then we can spray that day, we can spray the next day, we can spray a week, 2, 3 weeks later, depending on when the weeds come in. If we have the crimper, we can crimp when we need to crimp. That also takes that first herbicide. Our pre-application of herbicide lots of times doesn't happen until the soybeans are up. So we get kind of confused with the chemical reps sometimes, like, well, what are you using your pre? And we'll say, well, this is what we call a pre. Well, that's not a pre, that's a post application. Okay, well then our first post is this. And then you have a residual there, you know, the middle of May, getting you 3 weeks. Now we're kind of talking crop canopy. And those are the things that overlapping canopies and overlapping residuals can help us keep fields clean. So those are just kind of a different mindset that we have with that. Any other questions, comments? Thanks. It's not my first day. Let the strippers roll, he said. So, if you could please get to your bar and fall. No, just again, I will be around, answer more questions as needed. As far as I know, I am off the mic. We will get the bars going. AJ, you good with going first? Good. I'm going to call you out. If you're good with going first, so AJ Atkins with Dawn Equipment is going to run his bar. I don't know, wherever. Is there room over here, or no? Or you took up all that, or? No, not all of it. I can make it. Okay. Well, there's probably room over there for Justin to run over there.
Get the transmission figured out.
That was tapped out at 7. I should be able to do 9, 10. So if I can find the right gear, that's what we're struggling with. Yeah, I might make. If we try another.
Everybody's kind of different, depending on where you're at. Can you go deeper?
Yeah, he's probably running
That's probably a
6 inches. If he was running 8 inches, the berm would be a little bigger. It's a little bit of difference from the 1200. That's the 1200, so that's the beginning of trout. So about 8 inches. That's the 1205. They rebuilt the row unit, so you'll find the strip in the 1205. This tool performs the best about 7.5 miles an hour. He was close. He's not going very deep though. So. 8 inches, and that's going to band your fertilizer to 6. The Montag, the new Montag, it'll do up to 600 pounds an acre. Each row has a blockage sensor, so it's going to tell you in the cab if you do have a blockage on each and what row it is. Yeah, it's an insurance policy. I won't sell it without it. See the pipe shoot out.